Our exciting story begins with the Lidberg Mansion, where the main action of the game takes place. The main character bought this game on a whim during a sale, intrigued by its dark atmosphere, but soon abandoned it because she was tired of struggling with the hardcore difficulty level. She later regretted it because she wanted to look at the character from the game again, who would continue to die in front of her eyes. But if only Charlotte, as the main character is called, knew that she herself would end up in this game. It all starts with a strange man trying to break into the mansion. After examining him closely, Charlotte realized that she knew this man. After she called him Dietrich, the man became agitated, not understanding how she knew him. He asks the girl if they have ever met, because it seems to him that they are seeing each other for the first time. Charlotte thought about her answer, but her mouth began to open and speak for her. She greeted Dietrich at the mansion, knowing that these lines had just come out of her mouth. Charlotte tells Dietrich that the owner here is very gracious, but gets very angry when guests are not received properly. She told him she wanted to help, so she asked him to follow her, thinking in her mind that she had heard these words before. Lidberg's mansion begins the moment Dietrich finds himself inside. Dietrich's only chance to save himself is to simply not go any further. The man asked Charlotte how she knew his name, and that he needed to know the answer first. She promised to tell him if he went inside, mentally urging him to run away from there. But Dietrich agreed to go further, and the girl realized that this was the end for him. When they entered the room, Dietrich asks her if he can now find out the answer. While Charlotte thinks the game has begun, she tells Dietrich that she just knows his name, and that's it. After apologizing to her, the man says that he finds it difficult to understand her words, and she mentally thinks that it doesn't matter anymore, because now he is locked here. Charlotte realizes that Dietrich now has only one way out, which is to go through all 5 floors of the mansion. However, this was practically impossible in the girl's opinion. She thought that entering the mansion was one thing, but walking through all its floors to the end was quite another. On each floor of the mansion, you need to get a fragment using the collected dust, which allows you to get to the next floor. After collecting all 5 floor fragments, the key to the Room of Truth is revealed, and Dietrich will not be able to leave the mansion until he fulfills all the conditions. Charlotte tells him that it is already quite late, and it is time to go to bed to gain strength for tomorrow. In response, Dietrich says that he just wanted to hear how she knows him. Saying that it is time for him to go, the man goes to the door leading out of the room and tries to pull the handle. Finding the door locked, the man panics and asks the girl what's wrong. He bombards Charlotte with questions, asking her to answer him. Charlotte tells him directly that this is the Lidberg Mansion, and that until he has passed through all the floors, he will not be able to leave it. Dietrich, not understanding, asks her what she is talking about, and Charlotte explains the rules of the game to him. Now that the main character has taken over Charlotte's body and Dietrich is the main character, the game begins. When Dietrich tries to attack Charlotte, his sword's aura still doesn't manifest. He asks the girl in confusion what she wants from him and who ordered her to do it. Charlotte repeats again that he must find the true room. Dietrich got angry and walked past her, going to search, and the girl was surprised that he flared up so quickly. Finally, Dietrich asked her to clarify what he needed to do. Charlotte didn't have time to answer, looking at the man with a confused look. Dietrich is portrayed as a positive character, and his excessive morality often hindered the progress of the game. He thought that protecting people was the highest goal of his life, and he always acted as if he lived for this purpose. But the very next day, Charlotte finds Dietrich lying on the floor and wounded. She sat down next to him and, looking at him, began to think what she should do. It took her a few days to realize that she was a player inside the mansion. The time spent in complete solitude continued to increase, but the game still did not start. And when the mental state approached the limit, the steel psyche was activated. Charlotte pulled the door handle countless times, but it never opened. She didn't understand what would happen to her next, and whether she would really wander alone all this time, even without the possibility of dying. The girl thought that she remained forever in a dark fortress where light never penetrated. But one day, the main character appears in the mansion, and she meets him at the threshold. And within a week, Dietrich turns into a lifeless body, bleeding. Charlotte understood that if Dietrich died, they would be in big trouble. She asked Dietrich to wait a minute while she went to get a potion that would heal his wound. Returning, Charlotte placed her hand with the potion on the man's chest, after which he immediately woke up. The girl moved away from him and asked if everything was okay and how he felt. But instead of answering, Dietrich grabbed her by the collar and reached for her, causing him to fall on top of her. Looking angrily at Charlotte, the man asks her why she is here. While he was asking what she had done to him, the girl realized that it seemed that she would receive only such gratitude. She touched the stranger's chest with her hand again and said that she had healed him from the wound he had received. Dietrich froze, asking again what she had done. Charlotte eventually asked him to get off with her, mentally thinking that it would be difficult for them to get closer. Dietrich tells her that he wandered around the mansion like a madman, opening every door. Then he got down on one knee and said that he would do anything to make Charlotte let him leave this place. She replied that she could not help in any way, and again said that the only way out of the mansion was through all the floors. Dietrich asks how this is possible, while Charlotte notices how noticeably thinner he has become. Suddenly, a board appears behind him with an index of the roles of Charlotte and Dietrich. Each floor of the Lindbergh mansion had its own story to tell. Charlotte saw that Dietrich did not have much health and satiety left. When the man asked where she was looking, Charlotte realized he was on the verge of death. Grabbing Dietrich's hand, the girl said that the two of them needed to eat right now. In the Lindbergh mansion, a voice that dropped to 0 meant instant death. When Charlotte offered Dietrich something to eat, he said he didn't want any. She convinces him that it will still be useful, and he will have a better chance of finding the true room. Charlotte stood up abruptly in front of the man and said that if he didn't go with him, she would burst into his room in the middle of the night. When Dietrich asks if she has gone crazy, the girl adds that she will tie him up and attack him. This threat was enough for Dietrich to eventually resign himself and go with Charlotte. She asks him not to worry, saying that the food here is delicious, and if it weren't for it, they would have been dead long ago. In response, Dietrich tells her that he hates people like her, to which she says that she likes people like him. A special map, which Charlotte has used more than once, helped them get to the kitchen. But as soon as they enter the kitchen, they are greeted by an animal that no longer surprises Charlotte. The wild wolf began to growl and snap at Dietrich in anticipation of attacking him. Standing in front of the wolf, Charlotte sternly tells him that if he dares to touch Dietrich, she will kill him on the spot. This immediately affected the wolf, and he ran away from there. Charlotte explains to Dietrich that this wolf is smart enough to understand words. Finally, they reached the kitchen, and Charlotte invited Dietrich to the table. The man asks her what trick she is trying to pull on him, to which she replies that she just wants to feed him. Charlotte says he's definitely hungry, and Dietrich replies that it's none of her business. Dietrich stands up and says that he'd better disappear from her sight so that she won't think about him anymore. But Charlotte manages to grab his hand and stop him, asking him to just eat. She suddenly apologized to him, to which Dietrich replied that he had not asked for an apology. He asks if she will leave him alone after he eats, and Charlotte says yes. As Dietrich began to eat, the girl watched him and saw his health and hunger indicators grow. Dietrich asks why she looks at him like that, and the girl replies that she likes to watch the horse eat. When Dietrich finishes eating, he stands up and says that he is leaving because she got what she wanted. Charlotte agrees and tells him he can go, figuring that with a full stomach, he should be able to hold out for a while longer. Sitting at the table in thought, Charlotte understood why she was so worried, because she herself had once died in the game due to hunger. Suddenly, a report card appeared in front of her, which offered Charlotte to examine her abilities. She read through all of her ability items, noticing a couple that were hidden behind question marks. She finally laid down on the table, thinking that she would never use that crappy monster control ability. At this point, Dietrich, who had left the room, encountered the monster in the corridor and began to fight it. As the game began, strange system windows began to appear, but Charlotte's routine did not change. Dietrich decided to look for dust so that he could move on to the next floor. When Charlotte walked out into the hallway, she saw Dietrich trying to fight the monster. At this time, the system offers the girl a task to attack Dietrich. She understood that if she did this, Dietrich would hate her even more. Noticing her, Dietrich shouts at her to move away, as it is dangerous here now. But Charlotte could no longer change anything, since she had accepted the task. She said she wanted to help him, and Dietrich asks if she can't control this monster too, like she did that wolf. When attempting to do so, Charlotte sees a board that says that the monster cannot be controlled at the moment. She decided to lie to Dietrich, saying that she could not control him because he had a stone instead of a head. Dietrich asked her to just leave, because otherwise she would bother him. He began to fight the monster, while Charlotte thought about how she could carry out her task of attacking. Dietrich says he can't defeat him no matter how much he chops him. Charlotte called out to him, and Dietrich noticed the bottle in her hand. Before the man can ask what she is doing, Charlotte suddenly spills the liquid in his eyes. Dietrich falls to the floor, and Charlotte sits on top of him so he can't escape or move. Charlotte's task was completed. Dietrich asked her what she spilled in his eyes, and Charlotte replied that it was sauce. At that moment, they both noticed that the monster had risen to its feet again. Dietrich asks the girl to get off her so that he can go fight again, but she asks him not to move. Charlotte gained a new ability to control any monster in front of her, and she immediately took advantage of it. Surprised, Dietrich says that she mentioned how she couldn't control him, and Charlotte said that she couldn't before. When the man asks why it happened now, she says because she attacked him. In the end, Dietrich didn't quite understand what she was talking about, which was only to her advantage, because that way he didn't get angry at her. Dietrich asks her to get off her, and she tried to do so, but then suddenly felt something strange. Charlotte's mouth suddenly started bleeding, and Dietrich asked what was happening to her. When Charlotte looked at the board, she saw that she could only use the monster control ability once, and that there would be consequences after that. She suddenly loses consciousness, and Dietrich sits down on the floor in front of her. He looked at her in panic and did not understand why she had fallen so suddenly and vomited so much blood. At that moment, the monster stood up again. When Charlotte got into the game, all she did was knock on doors. She pounded on the door for a long time and scratched until she tore off all her nails. But the door did not open, and the wounds on Charlotte's fingers disappeared. The girl knew that no one would help her, that she might never get out of there. When Charlotte woke up, she didn't understand what was happening or where she was. When she noticed Dietrich sitting next to her, she asked him if he had brought her here. Ignoring her question, Dietrich asked if this was all a consequence of her taking control of the monster. Charlotte replied that it seemed so, thinking that she had not yet destroyed the monster. Dietrich, horrified, asks if she knew she would bleed because of him, but she says she didn't. The man again asks Charlotte to help him get out of here. He says that there are people who need to be saved and that they won't survive a minute without him. Charlotte tells him once again that she cannot let him go because it is beyond her capabilities. Dietrich shouts loudly and tells her that it was she who brought him here. He assumes that Charlotte is simply playing with him, noting that he knows people who make fun of other people's pain and suffering. Charlotte calmly tells him that she just wants to help him survive. She says that she will give him the medicine and holds it out to him. Charlotte says that if she doesn't want to accept his help, then let him do everything himself. While Dietrich said he didn't need it, Charlotte asked him not to get hurt. In the end, the man takes the medicine and says that he will go to his place. When he leaves, Charlotte collapses back onto her bed, thinking about how all she's done is fight monsters and tame Dietrich. Suddenly, a board appeared in front of her, saying that there had been 98 people in this mansion before her, and that none of them, apparently, had completed the game. She saw a strange inscription that said that she must punish Dietrich for the sake of justice. In the game, the main character always took Dietrich to the most terrible places. Charlotte wondered why she should be responsible for a monster she had never even seen. She noticed a sign that if the task failed, Charlotte would be trapped in the nightmare room. Dietrich reflected that several days had passed since his stay in the mansion, but no one had yet contacted him. He began to remember his life before he got to the mansion where his master was. He sent Dietrich to meet a man of high status, asking him to treat him with respect. The master adds that Dietrich should not even think about escaping, otherwise he will twist the heads of everyone he is trying to protect. Dietrich ignored the warning when he tried to find shelter from the rain while on a mission and ended up in this mansion. When he meets Charlotte, he asks if she's okay, and she replies that she is. Dietrich started to say that it must be hard for her to recover from what happened, and then he noticed something. Noticing the girl's eyes, Dietrich realized that they had changed color from red to blue, but he decided to remain silent. Finally, he asked if Charlotte had come to talk to him. She tells him that she is hungry and wanted to ask him if he could bring her some food. Dietrich asks where to look for food, and the girl is surprised that he agreed so quickly. While she was lost in thought, Dietrich asked why she was looking at him like that. Charlotte says there is a monster in the food room, but Dietrich just turns around and starts to leave. Charlotte stopped him and asked why he was helping her if he hated her so much. When Dietrich replied that it was because she felt bad, she thought he was doing it out of pity. But in the end, Charlotte gives the man the candle, saying that it is dark there. He leaves, and the girl thinks that she did everything as the task said. She remembered that the monster Dietrich was going to was afraid of the light, so the man should be fine. Dietrich realized that he had been walking for some time, but there was nothing around, including food. But suddenly, he heard someone's voices, which made him stop. Turning around, Dietrich saw the phantoms of his relatives and friends, who called him by different names. He couldn't stand it any longer and squatted down, asking them to stop calling him. They got closer and closer to him, while the man desperately begged them not to come near him. Dietrich begins to feel as if his master was yelling at him angrily, telling him how useless he was. Charlotte saw Dietrich's life table and immediately rushed to save him. She ran into the room and ran up to Dietrich while he was still asking everyone to stop. Charlotte brought him some medicine and asked Dietrich to drink it. While she was trying to give him the medicine, she said that it had to be swallowed. Dietrich was freed from his abnormal condition, and Charlotte immediately calmed down. The man suddenly ran into Charlotte and knocked her to the floor. Charlotte tried her best to get out of his grip, telling him to stop. When Charlotte sent Dietrich to the monster, she simply waited, knowing that everything had to be okay. However, when a sign appeared in front of her, showing Dietrich's life draining away, she immediately ran towards it. Before this, Charlotte took the antidote that was supposed to help the man. Dietrich angrily asked Charlotte why she was there. The girl explains to him that he attacked her, and she asks him to get off if he woke up. When Dietrich asks the girl how she knew he had lost his sight, she says his vision was blurred. Suddenly, a scale of his defilement appeared above Dietrich, which became equal to 1%. Charlotte knew that as the score increased, Dietrich would lose his kindness and become even more insane. When reaching the maximum, Dietrich will completely forget about the reasons for leaving the mansion, because his soul will be absorbed. Charlotte realized that the moment of desecration had come earlier, and if Dietrich went crazy, then she would have to live with his mad version. When she tried to reassure him that his vision would soon return, Dietrich replied that even if it did, he would have to experience similar incidents again in the future. Charlotte noticed that his defilement had increased to 4%, and it was very annoying. The girl asks Dietrich to calm down, again starting to tell him that he must find the room of truth. Dietrich interrupted her, asking if the room even existed and how he could trust her after that, mentioning that there was no food in the room. A confused Charlotte tries to explain to him that nothing would have happened if he had used the candle. In response, the evil Dietrich says that the candle cannot be used together with the sword. Noticing that the desecration continued to grow further, Charlotte moved closer to Dietrich, starting to tell him that he had to save someone outside. Dietrich says that he doesn't understand, because she locked him here herself, and now asks him to think about others. He called Charlotte a vile sadist who enjoyed the pain of others, and his desecration grew higher. The girl replied that he was right, but asked him to remember that there were a lot of nasty people in the world. She asks him not to die here and tells him to leave, noting that his death should not be so in vain. Dietrich suddenly asks her if Charlotte experienced this herself. Charlotte realized that he had guessed everything, and Dietrich asked her not to pretend. Dietrich eventually told her that if he ever got out of there, he would lock her up in the same way. Dietrich had been locked in Lindbergh's mansion for several days now, and there was no end to the monsters. The man could never get used to the smell of blood. Thinking about this brings him back to the days when he worked as a cleaner for his master. Other workers standing on the balcony mockingly asked Dietrich what he was doing there. He stood and listened as they said that he should be grateful to the high priest. One of the men smirks and says that Dietrich is a knight who can't even hold a sword in his hands. In the end, they said that it would be better for him to die in some battle. Dietrich knew that he was weak because he couldn't kill anyone, and that because of this, everyone hated him. But a woman appeared who extended her hand to him, and it turned out to be Charlotte. Charlotte was the only one who considered Dietrich a human being. The man suddenly remembered how he told her that he would lock her up in exactly the same way when he got out of here, and he felt ashamed. While he was thinking, Charlotte came into the room, asking him if he was asleep. Receiving no answer, Charlotte said she would come see him later, and Dietrich told her not to come back. She asks him why she shouldn't go back, and Dietrich asks her if she doesn't understand. He says his behavior is becoming strange from living in the mansion, and he is not sure he can remain good. Charlotte remembers how yesterday he told her that he would take revenge and asks if it is too late for him to show his good side. Before Dietrich can say anything, Charlotte tells him that everything is fine and asks him to look at her for a second. She touched his face with her hand, asking him to look at the wounds he had received. Charlotte tells him that he is hurt and she wants to help him. Dietrich pulls away and says that it is not necessary, while the girl continues to say that he needs to get better so that he can get out of here faster. But in response to all his antics, Charlotte suddenly shouted out that she was not going anywhere. Dietrich turns around in shock, and she repeats that she will not leave until she heals his wounds. Dietrich asks if she will leave after she does this, and Charlotte nods, so he gives her permission to do whatever she wants. He asks her if she came here just for this, and Charlotte said yes. But in fact, there was another reason, and that was the new authority she had received. Charlotte got the chance to charm anyone for sending Dietrich to the monster. When Charlotte asked Dietrich to take off her clothes, he asked if it was absolutely necessary for the treatment. When the girl says that his whole body is wounded, Dietrich takes the bottle of medicine from her and says that he can handle it himself. The next moment, something happened, and Charlotte didn't notice how she pressed the agree button so that she could charm someone. Dietrich's expression immediately changed, and he froze, while Charlotte tensed up. He says he feels weird asking what she did, but Charlotte decides to leave the room quickly. She realized that Dietrich's desecration was still growing, so she came into the room with Q, whom she wanted to take with her to calm Dietrich. Charlotte remembered how this cute creature from the game brought Dietrich peace. Suddenly, the board appeared in front of her again, saying that Dietrich had gone to the doll room. Dietrich entered the room and asked Charlotte what she was doing there. Looking at him, Charlotte thinks that Dietrich was able to live longer than she expected. When Dietrich entered the room, he saw a piece of paper on the table and decided to read what was there. It told the story of a young lady of a mansion who prized her teddy bear above all else. She never parted from him for a moment. They studied, ate, and slept together. Some people assumed that next to this bear, the young lady was struggling with crushing loneliness. Dietrich suddenly thought how similar it was to Charlotte, who had suddenly appeared here. He asks her how she ended up here if she had just been somewhere else. Dietrich says he doesn't know where she came from, but asks her to leave because he senses a strange energy in this room. After some time, Charlotte replied that Dietrich had gone too far. She goes over to the toy shelf and says that she thought that Dietrich would die much earlier. When the man asks what she is talking about, Charlotte replies that she underestimated him. However, the girl says that this room is different from the others. Suddenly, the room was engulfed in flames, and Charlotte asked him if he could get out of there. Dietrich is suddenly attacked by one of the teddy bears and begins to fight. Dietrich tries to understand that Charlotte has been deceiving him all this time. More angry teddy bears appeared around, asking Dietrich to play with them. At this moment, Charlotte suddenly comes to her senses, and her eyes turn blue again. She watches Dietrich fight with the teddy bears, trying to figure out what happened. She decides to put her hand in the fire, and Dietrich immediately stops her with a shout, asking what she is doing. Asking if he's worried, the girl says it's sweet, mentally thinking that nothing will happen to her anyway because she's in the game. In response, Dietrich asks if she would silently watch another person put his hand into the fire. He asks Charlotte not to move and says that he needs to ask her about a lot of things. At that moment, the room began to collapse, and Charlotte noticed how the piece of wood began to fall on Dietrich. She immediately rushed to save him, pushing him aside. When Dietrich woke up, he felt a headache, trying to understand what was happening. When he turned and saw Charlotte pinned under a piece of log, he immediately rushed towards her. She was burned. Her whole arm was left with burns, and Dietrich asked if she was okay. She suddenly woke up and felt pain, starting to scream. Dietrich asked her to be patient and said in a panic that he would now bring the medicine. After some time, Charlotte wakes up, and he notices that she has come to her senses. She says she is in pain after using the medicine, but Dietrich said that everything will be fine soon. Charlotte remembered the message she had received, not understanding what kind of current it contained if she could still die. Dietrich also tells her that she could have died, asking her not to do such things again. Charlotte thought to herself that she had not expected this outcome, But out loud, she answered him that it would not happen again. Dietrich said he needed to ask Charlotte a question about her eyes. He explains to her how he observed the change in the color of her eyes, asking if there is any connection between them. But Charlotte knew she couldn't tell him, or she would get fined again. Dietrich ends up throwing his shirt over her, noting that all of Charlotte's clothes are ruined. Suddenly, dust appears above their heads, and they both realize that they have managed to collect it all. Charlotte's eyes turn red again. Dietrich notices a change in eye color while Charlotte was saying something to him. She told him that she thought he would die without collecting all the dust. Dietrich asks why he is so rude, and Charlotte asks him to entertain her. He looked at her and didn't understand why she was still helping him if she was now saying such things with red eyes. The man thought that Charlotte had saved his life without even thinking about her own, and that was why he trusted her. At this point, Charlotte's eyes returned to their normal state as Dietrich continued to say that without her help, he would have already died. He adds that if something like this happens again, he no longer knows how he will react to it. After thinking for a while, Dietrich realized that he could trust Charlotte with blue eyes. In the temple, the office of the first priest, Gilbreth, the master angrily asks how Dietrich dared to run away after all the kindness he had said to him. He tells the servants that Dietrich is missing, and they are shocked by this news. The master asks to send a search party immediately so that they can look for any traces. The next day, Charlotte wakes up to Q jumping onto her bed. There was a basket of apples on the bed, and Q pulled one out and gave it to the girl. Charlotte asks him how he knew she was hurt and if he was worried. At this moment, Q's face became sad because he did not understand Charlotte's words. Charlotte suddenly remembered that in the game, he chased Dietrich and always avoided Charlotte. But now it was the other way around. The board appears above the girl's head again, indicating that the next game will start in an hour and a half. Charlotte realized she needed to find Dietrich, so she got out of bed. She finds him in the library, frozen in the doorway, thinking about how handsome Dietrich is. The girl approaches Dietrich and hands him a basket with threads, apples, and needles. When she tells him to take off his clothes and mend them, Dietrich becomes embarrassed. Dietrich asked why there were so many threads and needles, and Charlotte replied that it was just in case. In response, the man asks for what occasion he might need so much, and Charlotte says that it is always better to have a reserve. Suddenly, a sheet of paper flies to them from the shelf, on which was written the continuation of the story that Dietrich had recently read. The young lady disappeared, and after a long search, she was found in a secluded corner of the garden. The grandmother asked the lady why she was digging in the ground, since she could have hurt her fingers. The young lady burst into tears and took out a torn doll from under the bed, saying that her friend had died. The grandmother began to reassure the lady, saying that he would always be with them and that she would take care of it. Charlotte notices a board appearing, saying that the game will start in a few seconds. She wanted to say something, but Dietrich interrupted her and ordered her not to move, because the room was plunged into a strange atmosphere. At that moment, a viscous consistency suddenly began to appear from the floor. Teddy bears began to emerge from this liquid, wanting to attack Dietrich. Dietrich remembers that these are the dolls that he cut up during the previous test. He turned to Charlotte, noticing that she had not changed at all, and that her eyes were still blue. One of the bears pounced on Dietrich, biting him on the leg. Suddenly, Dietrich understood why Charlotte had brought him a basket of needles and thread. He needed to stitch up the bear's torn areas so they would stop attacking him. Before he could reach the basket, Dietrich fell, and Charlotte wanted to rush after him, but she knew she couldn't. She couldn't help Dietrich, because then she would get another fine. The girl noticed that he had managed to grab the game, but Dietrich said that he had dropped the strings. Then, he began to tear his own clothes with his teeth in order to begin to sew up the bears that were attacking him. He asked the teddy bear to remain still, so he could hit his so-called wound. When Dietrich struggles to sew up the bear, it immediately turns into an ordinary teddy bear. The other wild bears noticed this and rushed towards Dietrich, shouting that they wanted the same thing. Watching all this, Charlotte was glad that everything would end well. Charlotte noted that Dietrich had nimble hands, since he was able to sew up all the bears so quickly. Dietrich replies that it is a basic skill for a temple servant, saying that he worked in the temple before coming here. He added that he was useless, which is why many treated him like cattle. Before he can finish speaking, one of the bears brings the finished collected dust into his hands. Charlotte understands that Dietrich was able to pass the first stage, and the second will soon begin. One of the teddy bears hands Dietrich an invitation to their bear cafe. Dietrich, having accepted the invitation, did not understand what it was and how to understand it at all. He looked at Charlotte, hoping she would say something, but she just smirked. Charlotte understood that this was not her problem, and Dietrich at this time politely responded to the bears, saying that he was busy and would not be able to come. The bears immediately became upset and looked at Charlotte with hope in their eyes. The girl got up from the floor and said that since they were being called, why not go? When the man refuses, saying he has things to do, Charlotte replies that people don't always have to do what they're told to do. She added that sometimes you have to stop to pick up money, and Dietrich didn't understand. In the end, Dietrich agreed to go to the cafe, and the bears immediately ran up to him. Charlotte realized that there was nothing left of Dietrich's clothes at all, and that they needed to look for at least a shirt. In her mind, she knew she could dress him however she wanted, but Dietrich would hardly like it. As they walked to the cafe, Charlotte thought that she would think about this moment later. When they arrived at the bear cafe, they immediately sat down at the table and waited. One of the bears handed Dietrich a menu, and he was surprised when he read it because it had strange names. Charlotte said that the crazy, deadly, and elegant bears were very tasty. When Dietrich asks what this means, the girl understands that it will be useful in the next game, so she says that the taste of death is her favorite. She adds that the elegant one is also not bad, and Dietrich asks to clarify whether it is definitely edible. Charlotte asks him how he can think that these cute little kids want to harm him. In the end, Dietrich agreed, but before he could choose anything, the bears suddenly ran off somewhere in panic. They brought them a fluffy thing lying on a plate, saying that it was meat, so they should eat it. Dietrich doesn't understand what's going on, and Charlotte immediately rushes to the fluffy one. She tried to explain to the bears that it was not edible, but they said that since people loved meat, they could eat it. Soon the bears calmed down, and Dietrich finally placed an order, saying that it would be the sweet taste of death. The bears took the order and ran towards the kitchen to cook it. Dietrich asked Charlotte if she would be there, but she replied that it was unlikely. When he asked her why, she said that she had not yet fulfilled her duty, and Dietrich did not have time to ask which one, because the bears were already running back with his order. They brought him the ring, and Charlotte asked if Dietrich needed help putting it on, but he replied that he could do it himself. Dietrich says he thought the cafe sold food, and Charlotte says there's no law against bringing anything else. When Dietrich puts on the ring, something strange happens, and he and Charlotte turn towards the sound. A sign appears that the owner of the first floor has noticed the loss and is furious, and the bears have also started to panic. The board said that Dietrich would be the first to receive a penalty, and at that moment, one of the bears became very huge. Dietrich flew away with Charlotte, asking if she was okay, and she replied that everything was fine. Dietrich realized that there was no other way but to fight, so he took out his sword. But before he can do anything, Charlotte grabs him by the scruff of the neck and tells him that they need to run. Dietrich asks where they are running, but Charlotte asks him to just follow her. All this time, the evil bear was running after them while they were trying to break away from him. Eventually, Charlotte and Dietrich run into the room, and she asks him to be quiet. After some time, she looked out to check if the bear had gone away, and Dietrich noted that nothing more could be heard. He asks why they ran away when he could have dealt with the bear. Charlotte responds that the situation seemed dangerous, thinking in her mind that the bear could have killed Dietrich. She also remembered that if you don't follow the script in this mansion, you can die. Then she asked Dietrich how long he intended to remain like this. Dietrich notices that there is a wardrobe here, so he decides to find himself some clothes. After some time, Dietrich finds some clothes for himself and immediately changes. Charlotte says it suits him, and he notes that the outfit is quite old and that it is about 100 years old. Charlotte thought to herself that she was not from around here and did not know anything about this, and then asked Dietrich if he had found anything else. The man points to a piece of paper that has fallen from the ceiling, seemingly with a continuation of the story they had read earlier. The little lady burst into tears again when Mr. Johansson took the teddy bear away from her. However, she stopped crying and firmly said that she would take the bear back. But on the way to Mr. Johansson, the little lady accidentally knocked him down. The young gentleman fell, dropping the vase and cutting his hand on the shards. The new owner heard strange sounds and came running, her cheeks red with rage. That night, the master called the young lady to his office. He told the lady that she needed to learn to take responsibility for her actions and threw her teddy bear into the fire. The little lady immediately rushed after the bear and wanted to throw herself into the fire, but the young master stopped her. She didn't cry for long. Her eyes became dark and lifeless. Charlotte and Dietrich finished reading the piece of paper, and suddenly sounds were heard from the door. Charlotte ran to the door and said that there was someone for her, and Dietrich replied that he knew. The girl knew that if the escape was successful, then kind subordinate bears would soon come to them, and that is what happened. They handed Dietrich a note saying that the huge bear was challenging him to a duel in 15 minutes. For the rest of the time, Dietrich sat by the fire and threw logs into it. Thanks to the diary, Dietrich came to the conclusion that the bear could be burned, and Charlotte remembered how she did the same thing in the game. Fluffy suddenly started twitching and misbehaving, so Charlotte decided to take him to another place. She put the fluffy one in another room and said that he would be safe here, so let him sit here. With 2 seconds left in the duel, Charlotte returned to Dietrich. After some time has passed, the same big bear they were running away from appears in the room. Dietrich began to fight him and realized that all the bear's wounds healed immediately, so he needed a different tactic. At one point, when the bear's back was turned to him, Dietrich attacked it. He cut off his head, knowing that it would not grow back. In the end, all Dietrich had left to do was deal with the rest of the body, which was still moving. Dietrich immediately kills the bear and throws its body into the fireplace. Charlotte noticed that they had coped much more easily than she had expected. Since it was a fireplace and not a fire, the burnt bear did not die, but simply lay motionless on the ground while his helpers tried to put it out. Charlotte remembered that if Dietrich burned his head during this time, the boss of the first floor would die. Suddenly, the picture in front of her eyes began to glitch, and Charlotte did not understand what was happening. She saw a sign that said she was obliged to charm Dietrich, and that if she refused, she would be fined. The girl remembered that this was not in the game, and that they decided to stop them a moment before clearing the floor. However, she understood that if she refused, she would have to go through the pain she had endured again. She had to agree, and she immediately called Dietrich. When he turned to her, she did not answer him, and he thought that she had already managed to get hurt somewhere. When Charlotte agreed to the condition, the activation of the mansion's guardian appeared on the board. Dietrich noticed something was wrong and asked if everything was okay, but Charlotte ordered him not to approach her. She felt powerless, not understanding that if the outcome was still the same, then why was she given a choice? The girl did not understand why she only listened to Charlotte, who was in the game. Charlotte's eyes changed color to red, and she called Dietrich over to her. He walked towards her as if hypnotized, and at that moment, Charlotte kissed him. Dietrich always thought that this girl with blonde hair was irresistible. His hands began to sweat at the sight of her, and he didn't understand whether it was because of the rain or because of excitement. His heart, which had become frozen, began to beat again and became warm. Dietrich had been wondering all this time how Charlotte knew him. In Dietrich's eyes, Charlotte was calling him to her, ready to become closer to him. She told him that she knew the way he looked at her. But Dietrich didn't have time to do anything before Charlotte asked him if he felt sorry for that bear. She asked him to help the poor bear, and Dietrich asked him what to do. Charlotte said that he should go into the fire instead of the bear. Under the spell of hypnosis, Dietrich agreed without hesitation and walked towards the fire. He didn't have time to go into the hot fireplace when a fluffy creature lying on a bear appeared from behind, and Dietrich came to his senses. Dietrich immediately recoils, not understanding what the hell he is trying to do. He sat down in front of the fire and asked Charlotte what she had tried to do to him this time. The girl, who had already come to her senses again, did not know what to say. She saw a board that said the task had been successfully completed and the assimilation level had begun. She was transported into a memory where the little lady asks what responsibility Johannes will bear for stealing her toy. She kept asking for it to be returned to Penny, as it was a gift from her mother. At this time, the master told the little master that the time of punishment was over and he could go. At that moment, the little lady screamed that he was not responsible for the murder of his mother. The gentleman stands up and orders her to be silent, asking if she knows what nonsense she's talking. But she kept saying that he had to take responsibility for what he did to Penny. The bear burning in the fire asked the lady not to cry, and that everything would be fine. The master ordered her to be taken away and locked up, calling her a brat and that she still needed to learn manners. The assimilation process stopped, and Charlotte came to her senses, trying to understand what it was. At that moment, the huge bear rose up, asking Dietrich to return the ring to him. By this time, Charlotte noticed that Dietrich had even more wounds. Dietrich took the ring off his finger and told the bear that if he wanted to take it, he should come closer. As the bear starts to run towards him, Dietrich throws the ring straight into the fire, causing the bear to change direction. The bear rushes into the fire for his ring. After this, the dying doll's resentment was activated, indicating that there were 5 minutes left before the explosion. Charlotte didn't understand how Dietrich was going to survive the fire without the ring if it was their item. When Dietrich was about to leave, Charlotte stopped him and tried to detain him, but Dietrich broke free from her grip, telling her not to touch him again. She understood that he would not listen to her, and she did not know what to do. At this point, there were 3 minutes left before the explosion, and Charlotte thought that it didn't matter whether she got a penalty or not, as long as Dietrich survived. But she understood that if Dietrich did not go through this endless path of trials, then her efforts would be in vain. Charlotte eventually decided to bury Dietrich in a beautiful flower pot when he turned to ashes. Suddenly, Dietrich took a bucket of water, and the girl did not understand what he was going to do. Dietrich poured water on the burning bear and put it out when it said it felt cool. Charlotte looked at him in shock and thought, still not understanding the man's intentions. Dietrich sat down next to the bear and handed him the ring he had asked for. Dietrich asks if their duel started because of this, while the bear continued to stare at the ring. Dietrich told him that he would not have taken the ring if he had known about it and would not have attacked the bear. At this point, a sign appears stating that Dietrich has discovered a hidden path to the floor. Charlotte saw that the reward of the hidden path was the cancellation of the explosion. Dietrich told the bear that it would have been enough to simply ask him to return the ring, and that there would have been no fighting. Penny realized that Dietrich had returned the ring to the one who had hurt him. She promised to take responsibility for the pain she caused. Penny said that she would give the ring to him, adding that she didn't have long left anyway. Charlotte realized that she had completely forgotten about the hidden path on the first floor because she had thought it was impossible to get through. Dietrich sees the collected dust falling down to him. Finally, the dust of the first floor was conscious, and the first fragment was created. Dietrich and Charlotte finally had access to the second floor. Dietrich was unsure and afraid to go up, but he still began to follow up the steps, and Charlotte followed him. Charlotte had seen this moment in the game many times before, and it had begun to seem boring to her, but now she felt a thrill in her heart. At that moment, a sign appeared, which announced that guests were prohibited from going up to the second floor because the maid Charlotte had broken the rules. At this moment, the knights sent by the master tried to find Dietrich. Some groups split up to make the search go faster. The knights visited different places and asked the locals if they had singled out Dietrich. A little later, on the way to the village, they come across a pile of corpses lying on the road. The order was given to halt the pursuit and search the village for survivors. Another knight ran up to one knight with a found child in his arms. The man asked if there was anyone else who survived, but he replied that there was no one except this boy. The boy woke up and immediately began to cry, asking the priest and the knight for help. He told them that a group of bandits had attacked the village. When Charlotte and Dietrich climbed up to the second floor, the stairs that were strewn with glitter suddenly became normal. As Charlotte climbed up, a strange window appeared in front of her, but she decided to think about it later. Now she had something important to do, so she went into the room she needed. There were 2 items in Penny's room that Charlotte absolutely had to pick up. These were a ring of fire that could produce flames and earrings that were resistant to curses. But when the girl opened the first drawer, she found nothing and was surprised. She searched the whole room, but found nothing. Charlotte didn't understand what was going on. Thinking that the content of the game had changed, a fluffy creature suddenly ran up to her, and she asked him if he had time to eat. But then Charlotte realized that, unlike Dietrich, the fluffy one ate normally. In the end, she took the fluffy one with her and went to Dietrich. Entering the man's room, Charlotte called him, but he did not answer her. She was confused, not understanding how much longer he was going to ignore her. Dietrich was constantly in this state after the fight with Penny, and he took good care of his scars himself. Charlotte asked him point blank if he was going to ignore her forever. She asked if his words about trusting her were a lie. Dietrich lost his temper and shouted that she had lied to him first. But Charlotte interrupted him and asked him to help. She said she knew he didn't trust her, but she only needed help once. In the end, Dietrich agrees and asks her to lead him to the right place. After some time, Dietrich asks why she asked him to carry the groceries, and Charlotte replied that she couldn't have done it herself. Dietrich said that if that was all, then he would go. But Charlotte stopped him, saying that no one knew that she was storing food here, and asked Dietrich to keep it a secret. In response, Dietrich said that there was no one in this mansion except the two of them. The bell rang and the door opened, and Charlotte told Dietrich that he could go, and he thought that she was again not telling him something. Dietrich says that's enough, adding that he'll talk to the girl another time. Charlotte understands that they cannot let their precious food be taken away from them. The food left on the first floor was not carried over to the second, so whatever supplies were there were the only ones. The doors on this floor operate on a timed basis, opening and closing at specific times. There are many traps in the rooms, so doors must be opened with caution. At that moment, a board appeared, announcing that Dietrich had received part of the diary. The diary said that the little lady was turning 14, so artists were invited to paint her portrait. All the masters asked her to smile, but the lady's face was constantly gloomy. She said that there was nothing funny, so she had no reason to smile. The artists could not cope with their work because of the lady's modesty, but they did not dare to go against the will of the master. Suddenly, one artist asked if they needed to have fun to make the lady smile, and everyone immediately looked at him. At that moment, everyone froze, and the lady decided to ask who this artist was. Dietrich is eventually distracted by Charlotte entering the room, asking if he is having a hard time. She came closer and saw that he was trying to put something together from the sheets, remembering that she had done this in the game. After examining the sheets carefully, Charlotte asked if Dietrich found the shadows on the sheets strange. Eventually, he managed to match these shadows and get the word out. When Dietrich says this word out loud, the riddle is solved. He thought it was another trap, but then he turned around and saw that something was happening to Charlotte. Dietrich received the powder, and the Charlotte merger was launched. She is again transported to the moment where the lady asks the artist who he is. The artist introduced himself to her by the name Valak, the same one that Dietrich had identified from the shadows on the sheets. The lady asked him what he had told her that would entertain her, and he confirmed it. And she asked him to tell her how he was going to make her laugh. Charlotte comes to again, saying that she has a headache, while Dietrich looks at her worriedly. The man tells Charlotte that she suddenly lost consciousness. She suddenly asked Dietrich to remove his irritating face, but then she realized what she wanted to say was annoyingly pretty face, and she felt awkward. Charlotte realized that she had only made things worse, becoming confused and not knowing what to do. Dietrich told her that if that was all, then he would go, and began walking towards the door. Charlotte was indignant and said that she had just helped him, and Dietrich shouted that he had not asked her to do so. He said he still couldn't figure out whether Charlotte was trying to help him or harm him. Dietrich adds that he cannot even touch her with his fingertips and does not promise how much longer this will last, and then leaves the room. Charlotte, left alone, understands that it will be difficult to approach Dietrich, but she knew that it would be so. Be that as it may, Dietrich has found new diary entries, and new rooms will gradually open up. She knew that she and Dietrich would meet again anyway, so now she could rest. At this moment, several knights were trying to escape from the people pursuing them from the village. They didn't understand how they were discovered, but they still tried to escape and hide nearby. People with tattoos on their necks found them, and they almost died at their hands. They run so far that they reach Lindbreg's mansion, marveling at how huge it is. Checking the door, it turns out to be unlocked, and they go inside, encountering Dietrich. While Dietrich wondered what was going on, they said they were simply trying to find a place to escape the rain. Dietrich kept asking them how they opened the door and how they managed to get in here. But before they can say anything, Charlotte comes down and asks the men to come inside, welcoming them to the mansion. Charlotte suddenly remembered her first days in the mansion when she thought she was going crazy. Thinking about this made her think too much, and she almost choked on the water in the bath she was taking. She started coughing from the water that got into her nose. The girl didn't think she would fall asleep in the bath, realizing that her body was no longer what it had been before. Charlotte realized that every time the merger occurred, she lost consciousness, and even with a steel psyche, she could not control her condition. After the second merger, the merger rate began to increase. She wondered what would happen if the number reached 100, and thought that the game was trying to merge her with Charlotte. Then she heard sounds on the first floor and realized that they had arrived. She came down and invited the men to come into the mansion, while Dietrich was surprised by her appearance. Charlotte explained to the men that the mansion was cursed, preventing them from simply leaving it. She told the same thing that she had once told Dietrich. The men obviously didn't believe her words and laughed, thinking it was all nonsense. One of the men said that they had such serious faces that he even believed them, and then tried to open the door. Charlotte and Dietrich watched as the men went crazy and couldn't open the door they had entered through a few minutes ago. Eventually, the men asked to clarify that they will not be able to leave the mansion until they find the Room of Truth. Charlotte confirms this and says that she realized this when she herself wandered through the rooms and tried to find a way out. One of the men asks if, since that's the case, they should all introduce themselves. He calls himself Felix and says that he traveled a lot with his father, a merchant. Felix said that he had been friends with these guys since childhood, but Charlotte knew that he was lying and was actually a thief. The other two men introduced themselves as Hesta and Eric, also talking about what they do. Dietrich also gives his name, lying to them that he worked in the fields in his village. And Charlotte says she did housework. Dietrich gave her a strange look when he realized that they had both lied for their own safety. Dietrich decides to ask how they ended up here, and they answer that they ran away. When they say that the village where they lived was attacked by a gang of robbers, Dietrich turns to stone. He asks the men what their village is called, while Charlotte looks at him thoughtfully. Felix says they came straight from Owen Village. A board appears above Dietrich with a madness meter that begins to rise. Charlotte knew that Dietrich's psyche could break down, and she decided to pretend that she knew nothing about what she had heard. She took Dietrich by the hand and asked him to calm down, promising him that everyone would be healthy and safe. Dietrich said that if he got out of this mansion, he would not let them get away with it. Then Felix decided to ask them if they were lovers, and Dietrich immediately answered that they were not. Suddenly, they heard a sound, and everyone turned around. And Charlotte knew that it was a door opening on the second floor. Dietrich explains to the men that there may be traps and monsters behind the opening rooms, so they shouldn't go there. But in response, Felix said that they also wanted to go in there. Dietrich wanted to say that it was dangerous, but Charlotte interrupted him and said that she would take them there. Angered, Dietrich told the men that there were clean rooms on the first floor and grabbed Charlotte's hand. He dragged her into some room and asked her if she knew that they would come here today. When she replies that she didn't know, Dietrich mentions how she once said that they should hide the food and keep it a secret. Charlotte made an excuse that she had only assumed that someone else might come. She asked Dietrich not to tell them anything about her, but he refused. He told Charlotte to do what she wanted, but to stop doing nasty things. In response, the girl says that if Dietrich tells them about her, they will try to kill her. She asked Dietrich if he would talk about her if she ended up dying. In response to her words, Dietrich said that sooner or later, karma would catch up with Charlotte anyway. Charlotte eventually freaked out and told Dietrich to do as he wanted, assuming that this was the last time they would see each other. She does not understand what karma Dietrich is talking about when he asks her what she has sinned. Dietrich stops him and says that he will not tell anything, just as she wanted. He adds that he has a condition that Charlotte does not harm those men. She agreed, but Dietrich asked her not to brush it off and to promise sincerely. Charlotte took Dietrich's little finger and said that she promised that she would not harm them. He asked what she was doing, and Charlotte realized that Dietrich didn't seem to know what it meant, so she explained that it was a ritual. Dietrich asked her to be sure to keep her promise. His appearance made Charlotte laugh, and he asked her not to do it. Charlotte says that they should go because those men are already waiting for them, but when they come back, they see no one around. Dietrich assumed they were going to rest, and Charlotte had a bad feeling. A system board appeared in front of the girl, informing her that Eric had found a reflection ring. Charlotte didn't understand how this was possible, so she immediately decided to go and look for those men. When she found them, Eric already had a ring on his finger, and they were all surprised when Charlotte flew into their presence so abruptly. When she says she didn't see the ring, Eric replies that it fell on the floor and he picked it up. Charlotte tried to explain to him that she had a bad feeling and that he should throw away the ring. Dietrich comes and asks what's going on, and Charlotte tells him about the ring. He looked at the girl with distrust, and she realized that Dietrich did not believe her. Suddenly, the chandelier started falling from the ceiling and landed right on the floor between them. Eric developed a cut on his face, and the men began to panic. But suddenly, the wound moved to Charlotte's face, and she didn't understand why. Eric also noticed that the wound had moved to Charlotte's face and was shocked. The man immediately guessed that it was the ring and began to examine it. Dietrich took Charlotte in his arms and said that she needed to be treated quickly. Addressing Mr. Eric, Dietrich said that it would be better not to wear this ring. Charlotte knew that the wound she received from objects would heal on its own. She told Dietrich that she thought they should take the ring away from those men. In response to this, Dietrich asked who would then take possession of this ring. Dietrich says that this won't work because he will go into the rooms and someone will suffer in his place. He tells Charlotte, just in case, not to think about stupid things. A task board appears in front of Charlotte, telling her to find the second floor manager's ring and return it. Sometime later, Dietrich finds Charlotte lying on the floor in front of the men standing in front of her, and he asks what is going on here. When the robbers enter the great mansion, the tortured Dietrich is very happy to see them. The robbers gave in to the impulse that dictated that they would mercilessly destroy Dietrich. For fun, they hid their true identities and pretended to be kind, staying with Dietrich. And then, when Dietrich trusted them, they mercilessly betrayed him, tortured him, and as a result, Dietrich died. When Charlotte came to the men, they asked if she was okay. When the girl realized that they had eaten too much food, she told them that they seemed hungry. She added that while food is in short supply, it is best to eat it in small portions, and said she would put away the leftovers. As she walked, Eric tripped her, causing Charlotte to trip and fall to the floor. Charlotte became angry, immediately thinking that she needed to get rid of them all, and a sign appeared above her head, asking if she wanted to use the charm. At this moment, Dietrich enters the room and asks what is going on here. Noticing Charlotte lying on the floor, he asks her why she is here like this. Eric lied and said that Lady Charlotte accidentally fell and the tablecloth got caught on her arm. Charlotte knew that even if she told Dietrich the truth, he wouldn't believe her. So she lied to him and said that it was true. She told Dietrich that the gentleman had eaten some of the food, so the provisions they had originally wanted to share would have to be cut back. And then she headed towards the exit, saying that she needed to wash. When Charlotte was walking back, Dietrich followed her and asked if everything was okay, to which she said yes. To clarify, Dietrich asks if nothing really happened there, and Charlotte answers that it did. Charlotte asked him what he was going to do even if something happened. Dietrich tensed up and asked what had happened between them, but Charlotte again said that nothing had happened. After endless questions, Charlotte asks Dietrich if he is going to go into the new room that has opened up. Dietrich says he will go there, and then approaches Charlotte and says that she is going with him. Charlotte told him she was afraid, and the man replied that the very person who was chasing him might be afraid. When Charlotte promises him that she will do nothing, Dietrich says that promises must be backed up by actions. At that moment, those men managed to deal with the wild wolf they met on the way. Eric says he didn't even really have fun, and now he's bored again. He offers to catch Charlotte and have fun with her, to which his comrade agrees. Felix declines, saying that since they're getting involved, shouldn't they have more fun? N suspects that Charlotte and Dietrich have a shaky trust and that it will soon collapse. Suggesting using a knife, Felix says they will see how far they can trample a person's consciousness. Felix says that they need to create discord between them first by saying that Charlotte is aiming for the ring, and then we'll see. He adds that despite what they did to Charlotte, she was unable to tell Dietrich anything, which meant that she did not trust him. Felix asks his comrades if they don't want to watch them grind each other into dust. Eric gave up on the idea and left, but Felix said that they needed Eric in this plan. As Eric walked down the hallway, he wondered what was so funny about their plan, since he was bored to death. He began to think that he should use the ring to lure Charlotte and finish her off, and then show her corpse to Dietrich. While he was thinking, he heard sounds behind him, and a small boy suddenly came out to Eric. Looking at him, Eric thought that the boy was about 7 years old, and he did not understand why Charlotte and Dietrich did not tell them about the child's presence here. Eric extended his hand to the boy and said that it was dangerous here, so he should stay closer to the adults. But the boy suddenly turned around and ran back while Eric watched him. The man continued to look after him, thinking about something. Dietrich and Charlotte entered the very same artist's studio where the hidden painting hung in front of them. Charlotte closed her mouth because she smelled a strong smell of oil. She looked at Dietrich's numbers, trying to figure out if he was okay. Charlotte wondered if breathing in the game's oil for too long could cause gas poisoning. Dietrich got the diary part again and showed it to Charlotte, but she was looking somewhere else. Charlotte suddenly suggested that Dietrich look at the diary together. His reaction made Charlotte think she smelled odd, but Dietrich said that was not the case. He thought to himself that Charlotte's pleasant scent had calmed him down a little. He said he didn't mean anything by it, and Charlotte said she was glad he was comfortable anyway. When the girl came closer to the diary, she read that the artist had failed to amuse the lady. The lady told the artist that he was no different from the others, because he could never make her smile. In response, the artist said that he was ready to paint any picture the lady wished. The lady told him that she liked shiny things, asking him to paint a sparkling picture. The other artists, hearing the lady's words, began to whisper among themselves. In the end, the artist agreed and said that he would draw whatever the lady wanted. Charlotte looked at the painting and realized that it was not shiny at all, saying that this painting was creepy. Charlotte was suddenly given the task of not allowing Dietrich to leave the room until he was poisoned. Dietrich noticed that her eyes were red again, telling her that she always acted strange at times like this. He asks what she is going to do to him, and Charlotte responds by asking if he will be angry. Dietrich smiled at her words, saying that he was right, but she did not understand what he was talking about. Dietrich eventually tells her that he is okay, thinking that whatever Charlotte does, everything will be fine. Charlotte looked at his smile and realized that her conscience was gnawing at her. She asks Dietrich to look at the painting and tell her what he thinks of it. Dietrich said that this painting looked like Santorini style, and Charlotte asked him about it again. Dietrich tells the story of an artist with a bad reputation because of a painting by a student who was brought to trial and punished for blasphemy. Dietrich realized that everything in this mansion corresponded to the fashion of the past centuries. He asked Charlotte to look at the painting, noticing a letter in the corner, and suggesting that it might be Valak from the diary. The man kept trying to figure out why the painting wasn't sparkling, and then it dawned on him. Dietrich says it is tempera, and that an oil painting will not shine unless it is coated with resin oils. Dietrich realized what kind of brilliance the diary was talking about, and immediately ran to the table in search of something. Dietrich brushed the painting and got powder, and then sat back down next to Charlotte, and she asked why he sat down. When Dietrich replied that Charlotte herself had said that he was not allowed to leave here until she herself said so, she was surprised. Charlotte noted that Dietrich seemed a little strange today. In Dietrich's past, his parents asked him if he knew whose name he was named after. This is the name of a hero who won a great war many years ago. His parents, who lived in poverty, decided to get rid of Dietrich, who needed to be fed. Dietrich was left in the temple, and despite the many children there, he wondered what he would do if he was abandoned there too. The boy endured everything steadfastly, the brand that burned his living flesh, the fierce rivalry that was like torture. Dietrich was going to be great, to reach such heights that no one could touch him. He returned with a stunning trophy, presenting the head of the enemy commander to the emperor. Everyone praised him, saying that he was an amazing genius, the likes of which could not be found anywhere else in the empire. People said that with him, the empire would be safe and he would bring peace to their land. Hearing such cries in his direction, Dietrich thought that he wanted to die with honor for the glory of the empire. So he went to the battlefield again, and he held a sword in his hands every day, from his childhood. He killed a young soldier who begged for mercy, and he killed many more times. But this was not at all what Dietrich really wanted. The young man dug up the place stained with blood. He dug a deep hole and buried all his pain there. But Dietrich didn't know that the dam holding back his emotions had broken, and they were overwhelming him. He returned to the battlefield, but he was no longer a hero, but only a fool and a useless burden. The man belatedly thought about what he really wanted, and realized that he had achieved his dream by becoming a fool. Dietrich wanted to escape to freedom, but he didn't know that he would end up trapped in the mansion. Charlotte noticed that Dietrich was lost in thought and that something was wrong with him, so she started shaking him. She asked if he was okay, noting that he was now feeling cold and sweating. The girl continued to ask him worriedly if he felt dizzy and asked if he could see anything. Dietrich agreed with her and said that he really did see something now. When Charlotte asked him to clarify what exactly he saw, Dietrich said that it was them, and there were a lot of them. In the end, Dietrich decided to tell that he had achieved a lot before. He says he was thinking about how high he could rise, but in the end, he couldn't get up, and Charlotte asked him why. Dietrich said that everything fell like dominoes and suggested that he was that domino. Charlotte told Dietrich that if it was hard for him now, she could wait a little. Dietrich looked at her, not understanding what color the girl's eyes were this time, but he still didn't understand, his head falling on Charlotte's shoulder, and when he called her, he said that he just wanted her to respond. Later, in his room, Dietrich thought about what he was doing and why he did it. There was a sound of a door opening from behind, and it was Felix. He looked worried and asked if he could come in. When Dietrich asked what happened, Felix said he had something to tell him. He said he had seen something terrible, and Dietrich replied that he could tell him calmly. Felix told Dietrich that he might not believe him, but he decided to share anyway. Eric told Felix that he would go and help Charlotte, and then he chased after her alone and was never heard from again. As they ran towards the sound, they saw Charlotte holding a bloody silver lamp stained with blood in her hands. Charlotte turned around when she saw Dietrich, looking at him with confusion in her eyes. The man walks into the room, asking what the hell she is doing. Charlotte began to tell him that she really didn't kill Eric and that it wasn't her doing. Dietrich immediately noticed that Charlotte now had blue eyes. She understood that Dietrich did not believe her, saying that in his place, she would not have believed it either. Charlotte didn't know what to do, because she only came here for the ring. Dietrich asked if she had really searched Mr. Eric's dead body. When Charlotte said that nothing could be done with this corpse, Dietrich became tense and angry. Charlotte notices the board with Dietrich's madness indicator, which has increased. Charlotte told him that was enough, because the sight of a corpse made him shudder. Dietrich made excuses and said that this was not so, moving closer to Eric. He picked up the corpse and dragged it somewhere, and Charlotte tried to stop him, but it was useless. She asked him to stop, because he hated this, and Dietrich asked her if he could trust her even with blue eyes. He asked Charlotte to go back to the room and change her clothes while he dealt with the corpse, and the girl simply agreed. In her room, Charlotte changes into clean clothes. Later, Dietrich returns to her, and she notices that his madness meter has increased slightly. A man with a serious face asks Charlotte to tell him what happened. She, calling him to sit next to her on the bed, agreed to tell. Charlotte began to tell that on the day she took Dietrich into the room, she laid him on the bed. Dietrich held her hand and asked the girl to stay and not leave. But Charlotte knew that Dietrich was not himself, so she told him to rest. When she left his room, she ran into Eric in the corridor. Eric told Charlotte that he had found something and wanted to show her. She didn't understand why this annoying guy, as she called him, came to her himself. She tried to use a charm on him, but it failed, and the next attempt could only be repeated in an hour. Eric takes some dust out of his pocket and shows it to Charlotte, asking if it's hers because she dropped it on the way. Charlotte panicked and immediately rushed to Eric, asking him to give it to her. But obviously Eric didn't do that when he asked Charlotte to have fun with him. He grabbed her hand and dragged her somewhere while Charlotte begged him to let her go. Eric told her that Charlotte was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. He pinned her against the wall while she tried her best to get out, but he was stronger. Eric said that when they first met, he thought Charlotte was an aristocrat and that even her hands were soft. He thought that she was the wife of an aristocrat and that the child in the mansion was hers, while Charlotte did not even understand what he was talking about. Eric asked Charlotte to cry and beg him, and then he would think again about letting him go. Charlotte called him trash, asking him to let go again and hitting him hard on the leg. Eric immediately falls to the floor in pain and grabs the place where he was hit with his hands. He said she needed to be hit hard to bring her to her senses. Charlotte understood that she would not die even if she wanted to. Suddenly, Eric was grabbed by large, long branches that held him in the air. He asked in a panic what it was and why it was pressing on him so hard. Charlotte knew that if a threat appeared for her in the game, the mansion itself would get rid of it. She asked the vine to let Eric go, and they immediately dropped him to the floor. Eric immediately got up from the floor and told Charlotte that he would kill her. But he didn't have time to do anything, because the girl hit him with a candlestick. After this, Dietrich asked what happened next, because no one would die from such a blow. Charlotte said that when she heard Felix and Hest, she ran away from there, and then when she returned to take the ring, Eric was already dead. When Dietrich begins to understand what Eric did to Charlotte, she hands him the dust. Charlotte says that Dietrich tried very hard to get it, and that it is lucky that the powder was found. Dietrich asked Charlotte if she had searched the body for him, and she calmly replied that she had. She told him that he didn't have to help her then, and she would have dealt with the corpse herself. Dietrich felt awkward and said that gratitude would be enough. And instead of words, Charlotte simply lay on his shoulder, saying that this was her gratitude. Hesta ran into Felix's room and asked if he had found Eric, but Felix said that he had not seen him. Hesta became angry, not understanding where Eric could have gone. Felix also begins to get angry, realizing that things are taking a strange turn, and that this was not in the plans. The original plan was for Eric to fall down the stairs in front of the guy and to drive a wedge between the two and gradually escalate the situation. Felix suggested using the ring against Charlotte, or Dietrich, so that Eric would not suffer. But Felix realized that Eric had his own plans for Charlotte, and he decided to leave them alone for a while, but in vain. He saw that Charlotte and Dietrich were together, and then told them that Eric had disappeared. Felix suspected that it was their doing, and Hesta asked what they should do now. Felix said that enough of these games was enough, and that they needed to kill the two of them. He said that tomorrow morning they would poison Dietrich's food, and then, when he was weak, they would deal with Charlotte. When Felix found Dietrich, he thought he was a monster, not understanding whether the deadly poison was working or not. Felix told Dietrich that he was looking for him because he needed to tell him something. He said it concerned the morning meal, saying that only the dishes that Dietrich had used had turned black. When Felix said that Charlotte was in charge of storing the food, he wanted to assume that it was her doing. Dietrich interrupted him and immediately said that it was not because of her. In response, Felix says that he saw Charlotte go out somewhere with Hesta. He said that they went out together and did not show up again, suggesting that they went in that direction. Dietrich ran in that direction without thinking, and Felix realized that Dietrich really liked Charlotte. Felix thought he couldn't wait to see Dietrich's face when he saw Charlotte disfigured. When Charlotte opened the door to the room, she saw Hestu lying on the floor. Charlotte knows there shouldn't be any traps in this room, but Hesta still somehow died. Her steel psyche effect was activated when she heard some sounds from the side. Charlotte turned around and tried to see who was coming towards her, asking if he was the one who killed Hesta. But in the end, a little boy came out to her, whom she saw for the first time, so she was very surprised. Before she could say anything to him, the boy pushed her aside and ran away. Charlotte didn't even notice how he disappeared, assuming that this boy had killed Eric. Suddenly, Dietrich comes up to her and asks what she is doing there. Charlotte knew he had found her at the worst possible moment. Dietrich became wary and asked if he could open the door where Charlotte was standing. Charlotte asked him if he had had lunch that day, trying to change the subject. Dietrich noticed that she broke out in a cold sweat, and she brushed it off as her work being too hard. Eventually, the man apologized to her and burst into the room, saying that he needed to see what was there. Seeing Hestu lying on the floor, Dietrich asked why he was in such a state. A board with madness appeared above his head and began to grow. Charlotte began to prove to him that she did not kill Hesta and that she herself stumbled upon him by accident. Dietrich, not believing her, asks why she couldn't tell him the truth right away. He thought that Charlotte killed Eric and Hesta because they treated her badly. Charlotte replied that when she entered the room, there was someone in it. Dietrich asked where that someone was now, and the girl replied that he had run away in the other direction. Dietrich said that he had only come from that side, telling her not to give him any reason to doubt her even more. Charlotte handed him the note she had found next to Hesta, saying she didn't need it. She told him she just wanted to help. While Dietrich was reading the contents of the note, Charlotte decided to leave. The note said that they were in an endless captivity of lies and deceit, and that there was no way to escape from this captivity. The lady did not see the sparkle of the painting painted by the artist, so she ignored it. Everyone started pointing fingers at the artist, calling him a fraud. The lady asked Valak if he was ready to accept punishment for failing to fulfill his promise. Valak, taking the painting in his hands, said that he was not ready yet. The artist stood up silently, holding his painting, and it shone brightly in the light. This amazing sight caused other artists to gather around the painting. Finally, the lady laughed, and at the sound of her laughter, everyone who was in that place looked at her. The lady smiled brighter than usual, and the artist who made her laugh won the bet. So the artist painted a portrait of the lady, as was said in the excerpts of the diary. Dietrich, reading these notes, realized that the artist had used a shiny paint, but since the entire room where he was burned down, he didn't think that there was anything left here. But Dietrich noticed that only one wall in the room remained intact. When he remembered that the painting only shone when light hit it, he thought that it was somewhere here. Dietrich thought that if the wall was the same, then something should appear in the sunlight. So he pulled back the curtains. A door suddenly appeared from the wall. Intrigued, Dietrich quickly headed there. He walked inside the new room and found the very painting that was shining. The record stated that Valak's painting was considered an insult to the temple, and the paladins took it away. The lady never saw the artist again, because the one who insulted the temple was wiped off the face of the earth forever. At that moment, Dietrich heard sounds behind him. Noticing that a monster was attacking him, it wanted to hit him, but the man managed to wave his sword away. Dietrich immediately realized that the monster was aiming at the painting. He realized that if the monster was protecting the painting, it could be a valuable clue. Turning around, Dietrich was shocked by how many of these monsters there were. He suddenly wondered where Charlotte was, but then he realized that now was not the time to think about her. First, he needed to find Felix, but Charlotte knew how to control the monster. The monster swung and cut Dietrich's chest with its sword. At this moment, Dietrich wondered why he should help the man, and what would come of it. He thought that if there was no way to get out of here, then he might as well die right here. At this moment, Charlotte runs into the room and throws food around the room, telling the monsters to attack. While they rushed to the food, she ran up to Dietrich, taking his face in her hands and asking if he could hear her. Charlotte knew that the food had distracted the monsters for now, but it wouldn't last long. She tried to control the monster, but the system gave an error. Charlotte immediately realized that everything that was happening to Dietrich was because of the painting. Charlotte was warned that if she touched Dietrich, she would receive a fine. But the girl understood that this was the only way out at the moment, so she did it. After this, Dietrich immediately woke up and came to his senses, looking around. He immediately saw Charlotte lying unconscious on the floor next to him. After Charlotte lost consciousness, the system alerted her to her fusion, and she found herself inside the diary again. A maid approaches the lady and asks her to tell her honestly whether she likes the painting. The lady replied that the painting was not beautiful, and she did not understand what all the fuss was about. When she compared the drawing in the painting with a real meadow, she said that it was not at all similar. In response, the maid told her that both seemed very beautiful to her. After Dietrich's attempts to bring Charlotte to her senses, she finally woke up. Dietrich held her hand and looked at her with concern. She guessed that Dietrich had brought her here, so she asked him about it. The girl thought that he was very kind-hearted, and if he did not trust her, then he should not care whether she died or not. She looked at his face and saw relief in it that she was alive. Charlotte asked Dietrich if he had cried, and he replied that he had not. But Charlotte didn't believe him, saying that there were traces of tears on his face. She suddenly understood the reason why she was worried about Dietrich. All this time, she lacked human warmth, and she lacked a wide variety of emotions. Charlotte finally told him that her words were a thing, and she grabbed his face. The girl noticed a wound on his chest, asking how he got it. Dietrich waved it off and said it was nothing special, noting that he was fine. But Charlotte didn't believe him and asked him to wait there while she went to get some medicine. Dietrich grabbed her hand and told her not to go there because it was very dangerous. Charlotte mentions Felix, saying that he is outside and that she can't sit here and hide. Remembering Felix, Dietrich gets angry and says that they must find him. Charlotte stops him and says that if he goes out now in this state, they will get into trouble. She asked if Dietrich still didn't trust her, but he said that was not true. Dietrich eventually told Charlotte that he was worried about her too, but Charlotte couldn't stay, so she told Dietrich that she would return soon, promising that she would not die. She ordered him to protect the painting all this time, and if possible, not to touch it. She added that if they couldn't protect that painting, then everything would be over. The main event of the second floor began with the moment Dietrich found the painting. Charlotte carefully walked out the door where the monsters were, still eating the food. Those monsters were warriors who died of hunger, and it's good that they are so passionate now. Charlotte finally left, starting to look for Felix in the painting. If Dietrich gets hold of 2 paintings, he will go crazy, but if he gives one to Felix, everything will be fine. Felix himself finds Charlotte, walking towards her with a painting in his hands. Charlotte tells him that he is unharmed, noting that he has the painting. Felix said he took her with him because he thought he could sell her and make good money. Then, approaching Charlotte, he asked her why she was okay. Felix asks if she wasn't supposed to die, and Charlotte realizes that his true nature has begun to emerge. When Felix asks what's wrong with Hesta, Charlotte wonders how he stays okay while holding the painting. Charlotte was given the task of protecting the painting from monsters, and she told the man that he had misunderstood everything. In response, Felix asks if he is not a good person, and then asks again what happened to Hesta. Charlotte says she doesn't know because they both disappeared, and Felix screams, saying he doesn't believe this nonsense. Charlotte eventually says she kept it a secret because she was afraid Felix would be shocked. She said that both of them were attacked by monsters and died, and Felix laughed. Grabbing the girl by the hair, he said that he would not fall for this lie. While Felix screamed that he would kill her along with Dietrich, she begged him to let her go. She asked him to shut up, asking what he was going to do if animals came running. Felix angrily asks if she has lost her fear, saying that he will not die. At this moment, Dietrich enters the room. He widens his eyes in shock and asks Felix what the hell he's doing. When Dietrich was left with the painting, he thought that Charlotte was protecting this painting even when she was coughing up blood. This is how he realized that there was something special about the painting. Looking at the painting itself, Dietrich came to the conclusion that it was simply a beautiful painting. He suddenly thought that the painting was as beautiful as Charlotte. But then the man stood up abruptly, not understanding what he was thinking about. Dietrich wondered why Charlotte hadn't returned yet, starting to worry. She told him not to leave the room. He was worried that she might pass out again. Felix, holding Charlotte close, tells Dietrich that from now on he will have fun. Dietrich asks Felix why he is suddenly doing this, and asks him to let Charlotte go. Charlotte wondered why Dietrich came out when she had told him to defend the painting. In the end, Dietrich takes out his sword and says that he will not stand aside either. At this moment, Charlotte remembers Felix's words that he will not die. Dietrich wraps himself around Felix and hits him in the arm with his sword. But as soon as he did this, the wound immediately transferred to his own hand. Felix cried out in delight, telling them that he would not die. Charlotte immediately realized that Felix had taken the ring that Eric had. She asks Felix if he killed Eric, to which he asks what nonsense she is talking about. Felix said he picked up the ring because it was just lying around. Finally, Felix decides to admit that he was not actually running away from the robbers. Charlotte realized what he was about to say and immediately tried to stop him by telling Dietrich to return to the room. But Felix still managed to say that he was the robber who attacked the village. Dietrich froze in shock at his words, and his madness meter began to rise. When Felix repeats who he really is, the score goes up even more. Charlotte wanted to approach Dietrich, but Felix grabbed her and asked her not to move. Holding a sword to Charlotte's face, Felix asks Dietrich if he wants her to die. When Dietrich asks what he wants, Felix replies that he wants nothing but his frightened expression. Suddenly, Charlotte heard the monsters approaching, and Felix looked back in horror. He saw a bunch of monsters running straight here. She told him that they were following the painting, so he should let her go. Charlotte knew that the monsters would gather here as long as Felix held the painting. She also understood that Dietrich could not attack randomly because of her. Charlotte wanted to say something to Dietrich, but he immediately told her that he believed her. Charlotte abruptly snatches the painting from Felix's hands and runs away. She runs to the stairs and stands on the railing, right above the cliff. Dietrich, horrified, asks her what she is doing while he and Felix watch her. In this way, Charlotte wanted to lure all the monsters so that she would jump and they would follow her. Charlotte thought that if there was a choice between endlessly running in circles and the end, then she would choose the latter. Turning to Dietrich, Charlotte told him that he would definitely survive and be able to get out. After these words, Charlotte jumped down, and all the monsters followed her. Shocked and terribly frightened, Dietrich immediately rushed after the girl, but he didn't have time to do anything, feeling a new wound that was transferred to his body from Felix's body. Felix starts laughing, saying that life is so precious, and Charlotte died just because of the painting. Dietrich glares at him as the man says he wanted to have some more fun. He wanted to wound Dietrich again, but something suddenly flew past him, preventing him from doing so. Frightened, Felix turns around, trying to figure out where the scabbard came from. At this moment, Dietrich pounces on Felix and knocks him to the floor. He does not allow him to move, squeezing him from all sides, and thus removing the ring from him. Felix starts kicking and screaming that it is his ring and asks to give it back. When he tugs at Dietrich's jacket, he notices a mark from the children of the church on his neck. The next second, he immediately asks Dietrich for mercy. Dietrich begins to hallucinate how other warriors in the past asked him for mercy. The man hits Felix in the face with all his might, sending him flying back several meters. As soon as he dealt with him, he immediately started calling Charlotte. He began to make his way forward through the crowd of monsters, which never ended. Thinking that he was almost close, everything around suddenly burst into bright flames. The next moment, Charlotte woke up, trying to figure out where she was. She looked back, realizing that she had been sent here after what she had done. She remembered that when the monsters ran towards her, someone suddenly covered her. Suddenly, at this moment, a little boy comes out of the darkness. Charlotte asked him if he had saved her then, but he remained silent. The boy sat down next to the girl and handed her the medicine. Charlotte wondered if this boy was the one who brought her here. She noticed that this child had a ring of fire and earrings of curse resistance. Charlotte decided to ask the boy directly if he killed Eric. When she saw the message in the system that the task was not completed, she realized that it was not he who killed Eric. She also decided to ask about Hesta, clarifying about the ring of fire. The boy remained silent the entire time, so Charlotte simply thanked him for saving her. The boy suddenly sat closer to the girl and hugged her. She stroked his head and said that they needed to find Dietrich, asking if the boy would go with her. When he replied that later, Charlotte did not have time to realize that he could talk, as the boy ran away. Charlotte didn't understand why the boy was happy about the offer if he had no intention of following her. At that moment, Dietrich, who had overcome all the monsters, could not believe that Charlotte seemed to have really died. Dietrich's insanity reached 50% while he thought he had failed to protect Charlotte. Suddenly, the girl's voice was heard from behind, and Dietrich turned around sharply, seeing her in the distance. In shock, Dietrich asked how she was still alive. In response, Charlotte said, "Why would she suddenly die?" She clarified that the painting also remained intact and gave it to Dietrich. Suddenly, Dietrich burst into tears as he realized that Charlotte was indeed alive. While she was surprised by his tears, he asked her if he could hug her just once. Charlotte froze in place in slight shock, asking Dietrich the question again. The man blushed and said that he was very glad that Charlotte was alive. He tries to justify himself by saying that he doesn't mean anything strange, that he's just happy and that's all. Charlotte slowly began to walk towards Dietrich, and he did the same, and they hugged. While Charlotte was hugging Dietrich, she asked him if he was hurt or if anything was in pain. And the next moment, they both fall to the floor, Dietrich remaining lying on Charlotte. Charlotte looked at Dietrich's life indicators, noticing a decrease in stamina. She thought it was surprising that Dietrich had lasted so long with such low stamina and had only just now lost consciousness. At this moment, the surviving Felix was hiding in some room among a pile of clothes and trembling with fear, not knowing what to do now. He thought about Dietrich, that he had already heard his name, and if this was the same holy knight, then it was he who was nicknamed the demon from the battlefield. If Dietrich had not been distracted by Charlotte, Felix would not have been able to escape. The door to the room opened suddenly, and Felix screamed in fright. Surprisingly, the man who walked inside turned out to be Eric. Felix was overcome with shock and began to ask how he survived, since Charlotte had definitely said that he was dead. When Eric replies that it's not that simple, Felix says that there are monsters roaming outside. Eric agreed with this and asked if Felix had taken the ring, and he said yes. A small boy suddenly appears in the room, whom Eric immediately pushes away, while Felix tries to figure out who it is. Felix saw that it was just a child, but he didn't understand what he was doing there. Eric explains to him that this child is a demon, and that it was he who tried to kill him. Felix is surprised, And Eric adds that this is a very evil demon in the guise of a child. Eric addresses the child as a brat, and Felix does not understand why he speaks in such a manner as a nobleman. The little boy used his ring to shoot a fiery flame towards the men. They start to run away, and Felix tells Eric that he almost died, to which he replies that it is useful. Felix asks what he's talking about, but Eric tells him to look ahead where the fluff ball was lying. Eric calls it her nightmare, while Felix wonders where the child has gone. Eric tells Felix the story of how a demon placed a curse on the mansion where the girl lived, and it became filled with her nightmares. Eric says they were all her nightmare, and Felix thinks he has problems with his head. Eric tried to take the ring from Felix, and he began to resist. Felix furiously asks why he is taking the ring away, and Eric replies that he is now useless. Felix guessed that Eric had intended to use him as a shield from the very beginning. Felix begged him to let him go, shouting that it was not Eric, and if he touched him, he would not leave here without being wounded. In response, Eric says that, fortunately, the beggar from the clock tower cannot harm him. Eric tells him about some artist from the clock tower, and when Felix was distracted, Eric took the ring from him, almost breaking his finger. Felix became very angry and started yelling at Eric that he would kill him, but the man doesn't have time to do anything, because Erica kills him herself. Eric, looking at Felix's body, understood that it would not last long. Soon Charlotte and Dietrich find Felix's body, wondering what happened. While Charlotte was thinking about what to do, she noticed a fluffy creature lying in the distance. Concerned about his condition, the girl immediately ran to the fluffy one. Luckily, the medicine she used on the fluffy one was able to cure him. Dietrich begins to understand that there really was someone in the mansion besides them. He apologizes to Charlotte for not believing her, but she says it's okay. Suddenly, Dietrich tells her that he thought Charlotte was in the same position as him. She asked him what he meant, and Dietrich explained that she was also locked in the mansion, just like him. After that, the man asked if Charlotte really didn't want to get out of here. The girl couldn't believe he was asking such a thing, because it was obvious that she wanted freedom. Charlotte envied Dietrich, because she knew that once he found the room of truth, he would get out of there. And she, because she was just a character in the game, wouldn't be able to get out even if she knocked on the door 1,000 times. Charlotte understood that, no matter what, she had to stay here for the rest of her life. After telling Dietrich that he is mistaken, Charlotte explains to him that she cannot leave here. When Dietrich asks if she wants this, Charlotte replies that there is no point in thinking about the impossible. Dietrich told her that he would help her get out, that he would definitely pull her out. Charlotte asked him not to do anything stupid, assuming that he, too, would be locked up here forever. But Dietrich replied that he would find any way for them to get out of here together. Charlotte looked into his beautiful eyes, and she just wanted to believe his words, even though she knew it was useless. At first, Charlotte suggested that he leave the room because she didn't feel comfortable there. After they safely transported the fluffy one, they managed to find the last part of the diary. Dietrich began to read that the lady looked at the artist's painting in confusion. The owner burned all his paintings that were in the mansion, but the lady hid two that she painted together with the artist. Even after the ban on artists entering the mansion was imposed, the lady, without the owner's knowledge, went to the master's house and learned to draw. The lady tried to clear the artist of the false accusation, but soon news came that the artist had been locked in the temple dungeon. The lady said she had to go and she needed to meet the artist from the clock tower. She was told that she would hardly be able to see him, but the lady was determined. The lady, who had run straight to the temple, entered the dungeon alone to meet the artist. As soon as she walked out, unexpected words came out of her mouth. When they return, let them prepare firewood, and she will burn all his paintings. Dietrich asked that if these were the paintings mentioned in the diary, then why were they still intact here? Charlotte knew she couldn't tell him, even if she wanted to, because she would get a fine. She looked at the system board and saw that there was less than a minute left until the boss battle. Charlotte thought that she needed to quickly finish the battle with the boss and find the real criminal. Dietrich asked Charlotte to stick with him because monsters were coming. Everything around suddenly became brighter, and they moved to the place of execution. Noticing that there was someone there, they realized that it was the artist hanging there. Dietrich told Charlotte that if his thoughts were correct, then this time they had to protect these paintings. Dietrich noticed that Charlotte was not listening to him, so he addressed her by name. Charlotte's eyes turned red again, and she asked Dietrich to protect the artist from the clock tower. Charlotte glanced at the artist, and it seemed to her that he wanted to talk to her. He actually looked at her as if he really wanted to say something. At this time, Dietrich began to fight the advancing monsters. Charlotte went towards the artist, and Dietrich told her that it was dangerous. Charlotte pushed the burning stand down, and everything around caught fire. And she asked Dietrich to get it done quickly if he didn't want to see her burn. The artist, addressing Charlotte as a lady, asked why she was there. He said that she should move on while Charlotte felt the voice buzzing loudly. She was suddenly transported somewhere, and she realized that these were Valak's memories. Some man told him that he should properly assess his abilities as an artist. He told Valak that there was no place for nobodies here. Stepping on his hand, the man asked him to disappear quietly and never appear in front of his sister again. Charlotte came back to reality, trying to understand what that was. Dietrich ran closer to Charlotte, asking if everything was okay. Charlotte thought he was a fool because he worried about her, even when she was interfering with his work. She replied that everything was fine, wondering what she should do with the artist. The ropes with which the artist was tied were cut, and he was freed. After this, the room returned to its previous state. The artist was confused, but he saw his paintings in Dietrich's hands. He asked Dietrich to give him the paintings, and then he would send him to the next floor. As the man handed the paintings over to the artist, Charlotte realized that the fight with the second floor boss was over. If Dietrich had insulted the boss, something terrible could have happened, but he did everything right. Suddenly, Eric appears instead of the artist and takes the paintings. Charlotte and Dietrich look at him in shock, not understanding anything. Eric says that Felix told him the same thing as Lady Charlotte. Charlotte began to get angry, not understanding how it was possible that Eric remained alive. Dietrich said that he was glad that Eric was alive, but he had better return the paintings. In response, Eric said that he always wondered what Charlotte was hiding there, and he realized that these were pictures drawn together with the beggar. Eric suddenly broke the paintings with his foot, and Charlotte asked him in a rage what he was doing. The second floor manager looks helplessly at the broken paintings. Charlotte just froze in place, looking at what had just happened in shock. Eric laughed and said he hadn't intended to be such a bother. But, one way or another, he doesn't like it at all, and he apologized. The manager of the second floor was angry, and he said that he would destroy everyone. Realizing that they are in danger, Dietrich takes Charlotte's hand and begins to run away. Something started to happen behind them as they ran to the side. The place where the artist sat turned into an incomprehensible liquid that ruined the floor. Dietrich, turning to Eric, tells him that it was not him. Charlotte felt strange when she realized that it really wasn't Eric in front of them, but someone else. A board appears stating that Charlotte has succeeded in finding the real culprit who killed Eric. Charlotte knew that if Dietrich got caught in that smoke, there wouldn't be a bone left of him. But the system board says that Charlotte cannot interfere with the events, otherwise she will receive a penalty. While she was thinking about what to do, Dietrich told her to find shelter. Charlotte told him that he should too, but Dietrich went to reconnoiter. Noticing Charlotte's excitement, Dietrich told her that he would definitely return. He ran away, and Charlotte wanted to follow him, but everything around was filled with black smoke. Charlotte began to think that she could stop Dietrich if she weren't afraid of the fines, and then she would not have faced the consequences she finds herself in now. Suddenly, the system notified Charlotte that Dietrich had died. She tried to reassure herself that it was just a man she had spent a little time with. Nothing could be done about it, because Dietrich himself rushed there. Charlotte's previously activated steel psyche effect began to wear off. Eric approached the girl, calling her poor thing, and she asked him who he was. Charlotte repeats the question and asks why he is interfering with her and Dietrich. She says that this ring is not so easy to give away, that it is simply unthinkable. In response, Eric laughed, saying that the ring and the falling chandelier were his doing. But, one way or another, Eric said that it was not he who killed those insignificant animals. He said that there was another being besides him, hinting at that little boy. Charlotte knew Eric was lying to her, and Eric could see it in her eyes. Charlotte asked him why he was doing this, remembering that the creature was not in the game. She also remembered that this creature had never appeared before, so she didn't know what it wanted. Eric told Charlotte that it was funny to watch her panic when things didn't go her way. At that moment, the monster from that black smoke began to awaken, and Eric asked if they should kill it. He told Charlotte that she must take revenge on the monster for Dietrich's death. Extending his hand to her, Eric added that if she wanted, she could ask him about it. Charlotte thought about it, that she should at least find Dietrich's body and look at it. But Charlotte, with red eyes, insisted that there was no point in revenge since Dietrich was already dead. In the end, ordinary Charlotte said she just wanted to relax. Charlotte receives a notification that Dietrich has used Penny's item. The bear with the taste of sweet death disappears, and Dietrich returns. As soon as Charlotte sees him, she immediately runs to the man. Dietrich asks her if everything is okay, and Charlotte asks him about it in return. Dietrich admits that he himself did not understand how he was able to return back. He said that as the smoke began to clear, Penny's ring activated, glowing brightly. It seemed to him that he would not die if the ring was with him, so he went forward. Charlotte wonders how she could have forgotten about Penny's ring. Showing Charlotte the remains of the ring, he says that it was this that saved him. Charlotte says she is very happy to have him back, and he asks if she was worried. Charlotte herself did not know what she felt, but she was sure that she was on the verge of despair. The being who introduced himself as Eric was clearly unhappy with Dietrich's return. The second floor manager was fatally wounded. Charlotte looked at the artist, not understanding why he was so sad. Dietrich told Charlotte that they needed to go while she was thinking that killing the boss wasn't the best idea. When Charlotte looked at the artist's face, her head was splitting. Charlotte's fusion occurs again, and she is transported to another place where the artist asks the lady not to come to him anymore. The lady said that she wanted to learn to draw and asked about the money, that she was willing to pay more. The artist said that she could learn drawing from another artist. In response, the lady said that she didn't want to, because other artists were stupid. Saying that this is not the case, the artist notes that the portrait of the lady was originally supposed to be painted by the teacher, not him. There were rumors that the artist copied the teacher's style, so he was kicked out of the mansion. The lady denies everything and says that in fact it was the teacher who copied the artist's style. She told Valak that she would ask her father to clear his name. Noticing his smile, the lady thought that the artist definitely needed her help. But Valak said that he didn't need it, and it didn't matter whether he copied something or not. The lady said that the truth still needed to be revealed, but Valak said that it was not important. He says he knows his limits and asks Lady to return home. When the artist mentioned her father, she asked if he had said anything to him, but Valik said that he was not mistaken in anything, and she should not be with someone like her. The artist asked the lady to come back and not do anything for him. After some time, the maid asks the lady if she really plans to hide the artist's paintings. The lady replied that she had to go to help Valak and clear his reputation. She considered it unfair that Valak was hired, and then considered a bad person. At the moment when Valak was already in prison, the lady came to him. The artist couldn't believe it was her, but the lady confirmed it, saying who else could it be? He asked her to leave immediately, otherwise the knights would catch her, but the lady said that they let her in. Valak was shocked and did not understand how, but the lady replied that she paid them a little. She asked Valak to escape from here, and that she would help him with this, but the artist refused, asking the lady to return back. She asks him why he keeps asking her to leave, and if she does, she will never see him again. Valak asked if she remembered their first meeting, that on that day he made her smile. He recalled how he gradually became closer to the lady, and while everyone was criticizing him, she was on his side. Whenever everyone ignored his paintings, the lady, on the contrary, loved them. Valak calls himself a worthless artist who doesn't know his place. He asked the lady if she kept his paintings, and she said yes, that she had hidden them. In response to this, the artist asked to burn all the paintings, and this would be his last request. The lady became angry and upset, asking why he was saying this if she had come to save him. Valak knew that whatever the lady did would be useless, and he told her that he was already tired. He said he would spend a short time here, reliving the past. The artist says he will live the rest of his life in memories, but not the lady, so she must return. When the lady comes out of prison, she shouts loudly that she will burn all his paintings. The lady believed that the death of her mother, Penny and Valak, happened because of her. At that moment, Charlotte returned to reality as the merger ended. She saw Dietrich killing the artist and immediately rushed to his aid. She screamed and begged Valak not to die, that she couldn't live without him. Charlotte told Valak with tears in her eyes that she could not lose him a second time. But it was too late, because the artist died from the sword that Dietrich plunged into his eye. Charlotte knew she was trapped and couldn't move forward as Valak had asked her to. The system announces that the second-floor manager has died at the hands of Dietrich. Dietrich approached Charlotte when her steel psyche effect activated. He asked the girl if she was okay, and she replied that Dietrich was the only one who asked her about it so often. Pointing to the unconscious Eric, she asked how long he had been lying there. But the next second, Eric came to his senses and immediately panicked. They thought it was the real Eric because he was really scared. Pointing to Charlotte, Eric tells Dietrich that she is a real demon. But when he didn't get any reaction from Dietrich, he realized that he was in league with her. So Eric decided to act differently, starting to injure himself so that the wounds would be passed on to Dietrich. Charlotte asked Dietrich if he hadn't taken the ring, but he said that he had lost it after meeting Felix. Taking a large shard in his hands, Eric began to scream that he would kill them all. Dietrich asked Eric to calm down, but he told him not to come closer, or he would stab him with a splinter. Eric said that one way or another, all wounds would be transmitted to him, so he stuck a shard into his leg. A wound immediately formed on Dietrich's leg, who then fell to the floor. Charlotte did not understand why all the wounds were transmitted only to Dietrich, but not to her. Now she understood that she needed to take the ring away from Eric as soon as possible. Charlotte received an offer of charm that would help her cope with the task, but she was confused by the degree of fusion, which also increased by several %. Dietrich tried to stop Charlotte, but she had already agreed, accepting the offer. At that moment, she ordered Eric to come to her, who immediately became fascinated by her. When the man approached her without hesitation, he gave her the ring. Charlotte asks him to wake up, and Eric immediately returns to reality. Seeing the ring in the girl's hands, Eric pressed her against the wall and asked her to give it back. Charlotte suddenly noticed that the mansion was not protecting her this time. She knew it was because she was enjoying it. So she asked Eric to kill her. After several requests to do so, Eric stabbed Charlotte with a shard. Dietrich, sitting to the side, looked at all this with wide eyes, enveloped in shock. But when Eric did this, all the wounds were transferred to him because Charlotte had the ring. Approaching Dietrich, Charlotte told him that he was a good boy, and he asked why. Dietrich said he killed the man while trying to figure out how Charlotte survived. She took Dietrich by the hands and told him that it was he who saved and protected her. Charlotte asked him not to feel guilty because they were still bandits. Charlotte tells Dietrich that Eric first died and then came back to life. She asks Dietrich to look at Eric, saying that he is simply undead and that he has been dead for a long time. In the end, Dietrich agrees with the girl, saying that he had no choice anyway. Noticing that Dietrich was in a cold sweat, Charlotte invited him to lean on her. Dietrich hesitated at the proposal, but Charlotte pulled him towards her and hugged him. She could feel the man's heart beating fast with her body. She patted him on the back, saying that she needed to heal his wounds first. Dietrich asked if he could rest, and Charlotte said that he deserved to rest. In response, Dietrich hugged her tighter and thanked her several times. Charlotte felt his tight grip, thinking that she had done nothing for him. After some time, Charlotte took Dietrich into a room and cured him. The last time Charlotte looked at his stats, she noticed that the madness had risen to 50%. Leaving Dietrich in the room to rest, Charlotte went outside because she needed to get rid of Eric's corpse. As she entered the room with the clothes, she smelled the smell of Felix's decomposing body. Because of this, Charlotte realized that she would not be able to get clothes for Dietrich here and would have to look elsewhere. She thought that she should have killed these bandits right away, and then everything would have been fine. Charlotte had only seen monsters all this time, so she didn't know that people's bodies don't disappear after death. Because of this, she thought that if Dietrich died, she would have to drag his body in the same way. Charlotte came to Dietrich's room, realizing that he could not die before her eyes. She said that only when Dietrich got outside could she rest in peace. Charlotte lay down next to Dietrich on the bed and wished him good night. The next morning, Dietrich woke up and smelled a sweet aroma, but he couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Opening his eyes wider, he saw Charlotte sleeping in front of him and felt embarrassed. Dietrich jumped up in bed, trying to remember what had happened yesterday. Charlotte also begins to wake up, and Dietrich notices this, turning around. She asked Dietrich if he was feeling well, and he replied that thanks to her, he was already better. Looking at him, Charlotte asked why he froze, saying that she had not done anything here. Dietrich became embarrassed, and Charlotte understood what he was thinking. She says she wants to show him something, and then gets up and shows him the dress. Charlotte found this dress in the mansion, and now she asks if it looks nice. Dietrich became even more embarrassed, but replied that it was very beautiful. Charlotte did not believe his sincerity, and Dietrich said more boldly that it really suited her. After a while, Dietrich said he would go and inspect the second floor, and Charlotte told him to be careful. After that, she approached the fluffy one and told him that she wanted to talk to him. Charlotte asked the fluffy one not to hide anything from her and to tell her everything. Taking out the ring, she showed it to the fluffy one and asked if it was his. Charlotte explained that when she carried the injured Fluffy, she found a ring underneath him. She thought that that little boy was this fluffy thing. Charlotte asked the fluffy one not to pretend that he doesn't understand her. She adds that if he continues to remain silent, she will begin to suspect that he wants to harm her and Dietrich with the ring. In the end, the fluffy one transforms into that same little boy. Charlotte was surprised and realized that her guesses were correct. It seemed to her that this boy had something to do with the death of the robbers. Telling the boy that she knows he won't hurt her, she asks him why he helped her, but the boy still remained silent, and Charlotte promised him that she would not scold him. At this moment, Dietrich comes and asks what kind of child this is. Charlotte notices some kind of pattern on the boy's tongue and asks Dietrich if he knows what it is. Dietrich said that this was forbidden magic, and that the boy was cursed with silence. People who can use magic are divided into priests and sorcerers. Priests use techniques based on divine power, while sorcerers use magic by mastering techniques rather than divine power. To remove a curse placed on a child's mouth, a certain sorcerer must be called. Dietrich told Charlotte all about this, and she realized that he really knew a lot. Charlotte wondered if this temple taught things like forbidden magic. Dietrich replied that it was impossible, and he had read it from a book. Charlotte remembered the child once saying a word to her, so she thought that he could sometimes talk. Dietrich replied that in their case, they would have to watch him for a while. Charlotte suggested writing something, but Dietrich said that this was also impossible because of the curse. The girl asks why cast such magic on a child. She guessed that this boy knew an important secret of the mansion. By mentioning that the child is wearing curse-resistant earrings, she suggests that they will help dispel the curse. But Dietrich doubted it, because the curse was cast by a pattern on the tongue. Dietrich also says that the boy is under more than one curse, because in addition to silence, he can turn into an animal. A man asks a boy if he can tell him his name. The boy, looking at him, says his name, calling himself Noah. Suddenly, Charlotte asked why Dietrich had returned so suddenly, and he said that he had prepared dinner in the kitchen. Charlotte told him to go first, because she needed to talk to Noah about something. As Dietrich leaves, Charlotte tells Noah that he is not her enemy, but he has many secrets. After asking him to live as he is now, Charlotte tells Noah not to go near Dietrich. From now on, if he has anything to say, he must turn to Charlotte. When Noah hugged Charlotte, she wondered what was hidden behind that beautiful and youthful shell. Soon they came to the kitchen, and Noah began to eat with gusto. Charlotte asked the boy not to misbehave at the table. She tells Dietrich that the way to the third floor is closed, and that the food supplies will run out. Now they had to share what food was left, but she didn't know how. Dietrich said he would be fine, but warned that he was worried about Charlotte. She knew she wouldn't die anyway, so she told Dietrich to take care of himself. Dietrich told her that he had tolerated hunger well, so he asked her not to worry about him. At that moment, Noah suddenly said that it was okay to go. Charlotte jumped up suddenly and asked him if the way to the third floor was really open. The boy said something about authority, and Charlotte realized he was talking about her authority. While she was looking at her chart, Noah suddenly fell asleep at the table. Charlotte asked when he had time, and Dietrich said that he looked like he had passed out. Charlotte picked up Noah and told Dietrich to follow her because she needed to try something. As they walked down the corridor, Dietrich asked the girl where they were going. Charlotte replied that they were going to the third floor and that she would now try to open it. She was allowed to use the powers of the second floor, so Charlotte asked Dietrich if he was ready. But in response, the man only remained silent and looked at her with a gaze full of intrigue and anticipation. Charlotte tried to open the third floor, and the second floor's powers began to launch. She managed to open the door, and she didn't even believe it, and Dietrich asked how she did it. Charlotte said it was the first and last time, wondering why the warning window didn't appear this time. She thought that if she had the powers of the second floor, then the third floor system couldn't do anything to her. But Charlotte understood that no matter how much she racked her brains, she still wouldn't get an answer, and she would like to have more freedom on the third floor. She turned to Dietrich, asking if he was ready to rise, and the man followed her. As they were climbing, Charlotte saw a window warning that guests were not allowed on the third floor. Charlotte frowned, thinking that they would be punished like last time, but the girl said out loud that she would look forward to it. But Dietrich did not hear it. The responsibility board said that the steel psyche had suddenly been switched off, and that the degree of fusion was increasing by 10%. Charlotte didn't understand why the level of responsibility had become so great, and thought about returning to the second floor. Charlotte was given a new task to gain the power of words, and she realized that this task was not in the game. Dietrich asked Charlotte where she was looking, because to him, she was looking into space. Charlotte replied that she thought there was a lot of dust there. Dietrich said, straining, that it hadn't bothered her before. But the girl asked not to pay attention, referring to all this as the professional deformation of the maid. The girl wondered if she would be able to open the door if she received kotodama, which was what the power of words was called. She didn't know if Dietrich would be able to open this door himself and get out if she helped him. Charlotte wasn't sure about that, because if you think about it, she had never saved Dietrich. In the game, Dietrich always died on the second floor, and even if he made it to the third, the high level of insanity still killed him. Charlotte was worried about him, not knowing if Dietrich would survive and what would happen to them in the future. At this time, the knights who were looking for Dietrich were worried about the heavy rain. Because it was raining heavily, they couldn't find anything even with search dogs. Since the rainy season began, there were no traces or smell left. One of the knights asked if Dietrich had really run away, since it was not like him at all. They reasoned that he was the kindest of the temple children and the most capable. Not only did Dietrich always pass the most difficult exam to become a Knight Templar, his appearance was considered the pearl of the century. One of the knights suggested that something had happened to him, that he might have gotten into trouble, but the second replied that this was less likely, because with Dietrich's abilities, any trouble was not scary. But in any case, they have no choice because they have to follow orders. Suddenly, they heard someone approaching and fell silent in fear. The holy knight Elias, who was also a child of the temple and lived there, came to them. He said witnesses said Dietrich went to Lindbergh. Elias ordered everyone to go there to look for Dietrich. He said that if they found Dietrich, and he resisted, they had the right to take his life. Countless days and nights have passed since Charlotte was locked in the mansion. For endless hours, Charlotte stared at the reflection of a face unfamiliar to her. Horror gripped Charlotte until she gradually began to get used to this way of life. Every night, the girl tirelessly recalled her appearance before she entered the mansion. Before the resettlement, Charlotte lived with her father, stepmother, and her children. She always thought they would bully her, but her stepmother's family turned out to be better than she thought. Charlotte had the most conflicts with her father. One day, Charlotte asked him if he had thrown away her drawing materials. Charlotte broke up and asked her father why he did this, because this was not even the first time. The father said that he didn't see a problem with this, because he threw away what he bought with his own money. He started asking how many points she would get if he allowed her to draw. Charlotte's father told her that some of the paintings were distracting her, which is why she got bad results. Charlotte fell to the floor and said that she was trying her best too, and doing everything she could to be the daughter that suited him. Charlotte always looked to the rest of her family for support, but she felt like she was alone. The girl's loneliness made her yearn for love and communication even more. There was even a time when she believed that a stranger could become her family. Charlotte was so bad at impersonating such a person that she never got anything in return, and no matter how well she treated people, she always remained in piercing loneliness. Sometimes, Charlotte wondered if there was a special reason why she was locked in the mansion. In her past life, she had no one to look for, so the mansion condemned her to loneliness. She thought that Dietrich was different from her because she wanted to get out for her own freedom, and Dietrich wanted to get out for the protection of others. Charlotte decided to ask Dietrich, but she wasn't sure what he would answer. She asked who Dietrich was talking about when he said he would defend. Dietrich explained that he spoke about his comrades in arms because he treats them like family. Charlotte asked him to clarify how he should treat them. since they were not family. The girl thought that no matter how well she treated them, they would still never consider her family. Charlotte explains to Dietrich that family is family, and strangers remain strangers. Dietrich says that he knows this himself, and he doesn't care what they think about him. He still always thought about the fact that he needed to take care of them. Charlotte considered Dietrich a naive man who was stupidly kind and did not know how to hate others. She told the man that he was indeed strange, to which he only smirked in response. Dietrich noted that the sky was very beautiful tonight. The man saw the star and remembered a fairy tale from his childhood, a story about a boy who went on an adventure to meet a star flying in the sky. The boy from the fairy tale was attracted by this star, and he experienced a lot. He fell into traps when he was on the verge of death. He fought with the monster, which resulted in him being injured. But eventually, the boy reaches the starlight. The bright glow and warmth from the star healed all the boy's wounds. The man suddenly had a thought, similar to that of the boy, that he too was attracted by that glow, so he entered the mansion. But Dietrich was not like that boy, and the girl was not a pure star either. If we were to tell you everything that happened at that time, Charlotte possessed a game character who interferes with the main character in the game. Using her knowledge of the plot, she tried to help Dietrich free himself, but the mansion manipulated her actions and feelings in its own way. And Dietrich, who thought she was deceiving him, was no longer going to accept her help. But despite her fears, Dietrich, relying on his faith and kindness, overcame the crisis. Although there were some problems along the way, they fell into traps. On their way, there were always characters who were not in the game. Charlotte, Dietrich, and the little furball reached the third floor unnoticed. The third floor of the mansion, where Charlotte never achieved success while playing the game on her own. It was unknown what dangers awaited them, so, having decided to leave Noah in the room, they thought to look around. That's how their first day on the third floor of the mansion passed, and the next one began with Charlotte sneezing. Dietrich threw his coat over her and asked why she was dressed so lightly. Charlotte replied that thick clothes are heavy, even simple movements are difficult. Dietrich asked her to be patient, fearing that she might catch a cold. Charlotte asked him if he thought she was ill, telling him not to worry. He and Dietrich had been wandering around the third floor for the second day already, and it was like a copy of the second. But the difference with this floor was that it was damn cold. Charlotte even entertained the idea that this mansion intended to freeze Dietrich to death. Dietrich said that everything was fine, and that he had once already swum in the river in the middle of winter. The second difference from the previous floor was the clock, which stood still and did not move, as if it was broken. The watch gave Charlotte a strange feeling, and Charlotte still couldn't understand why. But then Charlotte realized that the diary entries should have been followed exactly the opposite. On the first and second floors, part of the diary was given before the onset of a crisis situation, and its content suggested how to deal with this situation. On the third floor, you had to solve riddles in the rooms, and the reward was a key to the next one. The diary was given out as the final reward, and Charlotte didn't see the point in changing the order. After some time, Dietrich again received part of the diary entries. Today is the lady's coming-of-age ceremony, but she, being the main character of the ceremony, showed almost no delight. The owner asked the lady to smile, but her difficult character did not allow her peers to get close to her. In the banquet hall, the lady was the brightest and most beautiful, but the stubborn Lai did not want to obey the owner at all. That day, the lady suddenly disappeared from the banquet hall, and a rumor quickly spread among the maids. Someone said he saw a lady kissing her lover as she left the banquet hall. Dietrich said it was amazing that on the first floor, the lady was still a child, but on the third, she had already become an adult. Dietrich began to guess that this mansion described the entire life of the lady. And if you believe Dietrich's words, then by the fifth floor, the lady should become an old woman. Dietrich thought that if they knew the full story of the lady's life, they would be able to learn about the Room of Truth. Charlotte sneezed again, and Dietrich frowned, saying that was enough for today. Saying that it was already late, he sent the girl to the room while he looked for something warm. No matter how much Charlotte brushed her off, Dietrich still left her in the room. She realized that Dietrich was truly worried about her, but she didn't think that a character in the game could get sick. But she felt that her body was feeling much worse than before. Charlotte decided to get some sleep, and at that moment, the fusion began. The lady's lover told her that he had no one but her. The lady asked him what he was doing, thinking that she did not want to hear that pretentious voice. The man said that she didn't seem to like telling the truth at all. The lady looked at his ugly smile as if he knew everything about her. The lady asked him to pull her out, the one who was planted like a flower and forced to smile. The fusion is terminated, and Charlotte's steel psyche is turned off for an indefinite period of time. She began to worry that she was not in her body, that it was too dark and scary here. At this point, Dietrich found a lot of warm clothes that would suit Charlotte. He noticed more comfortable shoes than the heels the girl was wearing. When he took the shoes, he heard strange sounds that made him turn around in fear. He realized that the sounds were coming from inside the room, so he immediately ran there, asking Charlotte what happened. She told Dietrich she was fine, but she didn't understand what he was doing there. Dietrich told her that she didn't look well, but Charlotte continued to say that everything was fine. Dietrich sat down next to her, asking again what had happened, but Charlotte still did not tell him. He threw warm clothes on her and asked her to stay in them, even if she was not comfortable. Charlotte told him she was fine and wanted to sleep, but he didn't really believe her. He suddenly moved closer to her face to touch her forehead. Charlotte pulled away and asked, confused, what he was doing, and Dietrich said that his guess was correct. He asked Charlotte how she couldn't feel that she had a temperature. After some time, the steel psyche returns, and the girl breathes a sigh of relief, thinking that it will never return. She lay with a wet cloth on her forehead and thought that her illness was part of the fine she had received. All this time, Dietrich was in the room, and Charlotte did not understand why he did not leave. Charlotte told him that she felt better and he could leave now. In response, Dietrich asked how he could leave her in such a state. Charlotte told him to leave anyway because she was afraid that she wouldn't want to let him go later. When Dietrich said she wouldn't do it, Charlotte told him not to believe what he saw. She said that she could destroy what was dear to him, and Dietrich simply asked her to eat more. The man asked her what she could do in such a state, and she replied that they would live and see. At that moment, Noah, who was crying, runs into the room. Charlotte asks the boy how he got here as he runs up to her. Noah asked if Charlotte was okay, but then immediately fell asleep. Charlotte was surprised to see that the boy had fallen asleep. 1476. Dietrich asked how long Noah slept, and she said he woke up after 1 or 2 days. Dietrich said it looked like Noah's curse. He remembered how on the second floor, the boy gave Charlotte some hint and fell asleep. Perhaps Noah discovered the secret behind the curse and fell asleep for several days as a result. Dietrich explained that the more Noah talks, the more he sleeps. Charlotte asked if children didn't get sick more often, and Dietrich said that was true. Charlotte handed Noah to Dietrich and told them to leave so the boy wouldn't catch a cold from her. Dietrich countered that Noah shouldn't be sick, which was why Charlotte was throwing them out of the room. Dietrich asked Charlotte to call him if she needed help. Once Dietrich left, Charlotte was able to relax a little. Now she had to act before Dietrich came back. She knew she had a fever, but she couldn't back down. Charlotte knew that in a pinch she could use the ring. In this game, with a monstrous level of difficulty on the 3rd floor, there are many who put Dietrich. She understood that the longer the monsters were here, the faster Dietrich's sanity would decline. Charlotte decided to get rid of them in advance, while Dietrich was away. Since Charlotte couldn't control these monsters, she decided that she wouldn't make a mistake this time. Running up to the monster from behind, Charlotte stabbed him in the neck with her sword. All the monsters immediately turned toward the sound and noticed the girl, starting to chase her. Charlotte had a plan to do something when the monsters gathered around her. One of the monsters who approached her received a blow to the head from her sword. Up close, the monster looked hideous, and Charlotte could see all its abominations. Suddenly, Dietrich bursts into the room and calls Charlotte. But in fact, Dietrich came running here because he heard a familiar scream. Noticing the man in front of him, Dietrich freezes and tells him that he was looking for him. It turned out to be the same knight whom Dietrich had once killed while he was begging for mercy. Taking a closer look, Dietrich realized that he was not mistaken, and it really was him.